Chapter 1640. Ning Jiuma quickly grabbed her hand, panicking like a pitiful child. He said, "Okay, I'll Wei okay." But in the next moment, Wei Wei Bai collapsed. Her eyes slowly closed as blood flowed all over the ground. Ning Jiuma was stunned. He suddenly screamed at the top of his lungs. He held the sword and stabbed it into the old emperor's body like a madman. On the verge of death, the old emperor suddenly woke up and the effect of the love of the emperor disappeared. Where was he? What was he doing? Why was he here? Before he could figure it out, the sword had already pierced through his heart and he died. After killing the emperor, Ning Jiuma crawled to Wei Wei Bai's side. He hugged her, his eyes bloodshot. "Ah Wei, you're fine. You're fine." He reached out and pulled the sword out. Blood splattered all over the ground. He immediately wrapped her clothes tightly around her chest. The system expressed that it was very tragic. Then it activated the life guarantee. It seemed that it couldn't avoid the eunuch 100 times. What a sad story. Even the life guarantee couldn't heal such a heavy wound. Even the main mission was only 98. It was all its fault for being lazy. It was retribution. That was what it thought. The favorability notification sounded. Ding, the male lead's favorability is 100. Congratulations to the host for completing the main mission. The host's body has been severely damaged. You need to leave this world immediately. Countdown to leave. If you fail to leave, you will have to solve the side mission for a lifetime. The host needs to stay in this world for a lifetime to be the empress. Wait, wasn't she supposed to be the empress and have a lifetime to solve? Why was she supposed to be the empress for a lifetime? This was a completely different mission from being the empress for a day and being able to leave. The host is heavily injured. The main system will send a free high-level life guarantee. Please accept. The system immediately accepted. High-level life guarantee. As long as you had a breath, you would be alive and kicking. Even zombies could turn you into a normal person. Successfully accepted. The host is very cute. Please be the empress for a lifetime. The system watched as Ning Jiuma hugged Wei Wei Bai and cried in agony. With the old emperor dead, the battle was Ning Jiuma's. Zheng Qiao led his men to clean up all of the old emperor's soldiers. However, Ning Jiuma couldn't care less about anything. He only had Wei Wei Bai to protect. What throne? What fruit of victory? He didn't care at all. The system looked at the red line, and a strange thought suddenly flashed through its mind. This lifetime side mission might have something to do with the influence of the red line. Just look at Wei Wei Bai's broken luck. If the main system didn't hack her to death, she could count herself lucky. But the continuous high luck side quests and high-level life support rewards. There were even small gifts that were randomly distributed during festivals. All of them had received huge rewards. The red string was tied to Yiyuxuan. Yiyuxuan was the child of destiny. Therefore, his providence could penetrate space and affect Wei Wei Bai's providence. Even tampering with her mission. The purpose of all this was to force her to stay here for the rest of her life. It seemed that Yiyuxuan was really obsessed with her whole life. The system felt a headache. How should it face Wei Wei Bai? If she knew, she would stay here for the rest of her life. She would probably become a super big salted fish, the kind that couldn't even be bothered to turn over. In the previous world, she had complained for the rest of her life. It had been too long. She was so bored that she wanted to grow hair. Mobile. Chapter 1641. She was probably even more bored in this world. There were no games to play and only a few drama books. The host would definitely nag again. What if she didn't do the side mission and left early? The system indicated that it needed to solve this terrible problem. It silently bought earplugs and stuffed them into its ears. Very good, it couldn't hear the host's complaints. It wouldn't cut it even if it died. It could only wrong the host and squat in this world for a lifetime. At most, it would download SpongeBob SquarePants for her. Those who survived the disaster in the palace clearly remembered that day. The crown prince killed his father and usurped the throne. The smell of blood floated in the air and the blood was like a river. The floor tiles were soaked red and couldn't be washed clean. They could only dig out the tiles and rebuild them. After the old emperor died, his corpse was whipped by the crown prince. Even if he entered the imperial tomb according to the rules, it was the most remote place. Even the crown prince, no, the emperor didn't need anyone to visit the tomb. Except for an old eunuch, no one dared to go. The new emperor was cruel and merciless. Those ministers who flattered him to get the position were either killed or punished. Even if the new emperor was so cold, his reputation was growing. He didn't like women and didn't have any hobby of shaking the national treasury. Other than guarding the empress, he buried himself in government affairs. The empress had been seriously injured in that cruel palace war and was in a coma. She slept from spring to the end of summer. The lotus flowers had withered, but she was still sleeping quietly. Ning Jioma dealt with a criminal minister and walked quickly into the palace. His face was so cold that it was scary. A pair of black eyes, cold to the bone. Zheng Qiao followed behind him carefully. Your Majesty, the Empress's wound has healed. The imperial doctor said that the Empress's condition is getting better. Ning Jioma said coldly, I don't want to listen to this nonsense. If she doesn't wake up, I will cut off the heads of those useless people. Who was the most miserable in the palace? Imperial Hospital. They were worried that their heads would fall off. Several imperial doctors were so worried that they were seriously ill. Ning Jioma suddenly slowed down and looked at the golden bell tied to the bed. The bell swayed with the wind. Under the bell, Wei Wei Bai's peaceful sleeping face was pale and delicate. After sleeping for a few months, her body had become even thinner and weaker. Zheng Qiao stealthily stepped back and waved her hand. All the palace maids followed her out. The door closed quietly, giving Ning Jioma a quiet space. No one wanted to recall the desperate look on Ning Jioma's face when he hugged Wei Wei Bai, who was covered in blood. He was in so much pain that he wished he was dead. It was not enough to describe his appearance back then. If they hadn't found out about Wei Wei Bai, she would have had a chance to live. Maybe Ning Jioma didn't even want to treat his own wound. He allowed himself to follow Wei Wei Bai. Zheng Yao's legs turned to jelly at the thought of that scene. When he led the army to set up a formation to kill people, he wasn't that scared. Only when he saw Ning Jioma's desperate and crazy eyes did he feel a chill run down his spine. Later on, he tried to save her day and night. Finally, Ning Jioma and Wei Wei Bai were saved. Ning Jioma's wounds were getting better day by day, and his means were getting sharper and more powerful. But he was also getting colder and colder. After Zheng Yao closed the door, Ning Jioma sat by the bed in a daze. He reached out and slowly put his hand between her weak fingers, intertwining his fingers. Ning Jioma didn't say anything and just sat there quietly. Although she was conferred the title of Empress after he sat on the throne, they didn't hold a real wedding. Chapter 1642. Because she was still asleep. Ning Jioma closed his eyes as if he was enduring something, but he couldn't hold it in any longer. Wei, wake up. This house is too big. Without you here, I'm scared every night. He said as he kissed her hand, tears falling from his red eyes. I'm so tired. Some women wanted to get close to me, but I kicked them out of the palace. Everyone wants to bully me. I'm so sad. He cried and trembled. A lonely world, a pitiful one. It was so sad. Wei Wei Bai and the system floated above his head expressionlessly, watching him cry. Didn't he find the old emperor's antidote a long time ago and eat it all? Wei Wei Bai said. Ning Jioma was no longer a fool. But every time he sat here alone, he would become a little fool and cry miserably, telling others that he was bullied. It felt like the scene of a child in kindergarten crying and complaining to their elders when they returned home. The system said, to wake you up, he thought you liked Fool Ning more, so he pretended to be Fool Ning and cried to you every day, hoping that you'll wake up. Wei Wei Bai crossed her arms. We really can't go back? Once she heard that the side mission required a lifetime. Wei Wei Bai refused and generously said that she could accept the punishment. After arguing with the system for a month, the system finally couldn't take it anymore and pressed the button to go back. Even if the system had 100 earplugs, it couldn't stand the host's terrifying hypnotic nagging. But the button failed, and the side mission was stuck at the red line. Even if it couldn't be completed, it would still stay there forever. As long as Wei Wei Bai didn't complete the mission, she could only float behind Ning Jioma like a lonely ghost. Wei Wei Bai had been floating for a few months. She still couldn't go back. She felt that her life was so dark. A lifetime of strategy time was simply a nightmare. The system looked haggard. I'll download more files for the domineering little wife. There are so many novels. Wei Wei Bai, it's not enough for me to read for a lifetime. The system flipped through it again and took out its collection of films. This is a super blockbuster of the nurse and the doctor, the male caretaker and the housewife, and the teacher and the student. Do you want to watch it? Don't you want to watch it? Bai Wei Wei sneered. Am I such a person who hasn't seen the world? I've already done it before. Why would I need your film? The system indicated that it had suffered 10,000 blows. It never did. Therefore, he didn't know or understand. He didn't want to see Wei Wei Bai's proud eyes. Wei Wei Bai watched as Ning Jiuma cried so miserably. She finally said, "Forget it. We can't leave anyway, so we might as well complete the side mission." She wanted to be Ning Jiuma's guardian spirit for the rest of her life and watch him cry every day. It was even more boring. When the system heard this, it silently hid its beeping videos. Wei Wei Bai said calmly, "You said to show it to me. Don't hide it anymore." After Ning Jiuma finished crying, he went to bed and hugged Wei Wei Bai to sleep. Listening to her steady heartbeat, his violent mood slowly calmed down. "Ah Wei, if you're like this, I can't have fat babies with you." He complained softly, unspeakably pitiful. Wei Wei Bai sank into his body and slowly felt his body fusing with hers. When she opened her eyes, she could hear his slightly unsteady breathing beside her. He was asleep. Chapter 1643. On the dark bed, he leaned his face against her shoulder. There were still traces of tears at the corners of his eyes. Wei Wei Bai looked at him for a while before gently wiping the corners of his eyes. Her actions were calm but very gentle. When Ning Jiuma woke up the next day, he saw that Wei Wei Bai was still sleeping soundly. He stared at her bitterly for a long time before hugging her. He washed her face, combed her hair, and massaged her limbs. In the past, Wei Wei Bai took care of him. Now, he was the one taking care of her. After Ning Jiuma massaged her, he put on beautiful clothes for her. It was the blooming season of the jade hairpin flower. Ning Jiuma inserted a beautiful jade hairpin flower into her hair bun. "You've been sleeping for too long. You've lost all color." He muttered softly. He reached out and touched some rouge, applying some on her face. The pink color added a hint of vitality to her pale jade-like face. Delicate, weak, and unbearable to hold. He lowered his head and kissed her lips, not daring to have any other thoughts. Her body was so weak. If he went overboard, he was afraid that Wei Wei Bai would really not wake up. Ning Jiuma slowly crouched beside her and nagged a lot. When he was satisfied, he went to deal with official business. When he went to court, he didn't like anyone. Without Wei Wei Bai by his side, he was irritated. So when he did things, he was frighteningly cold. As a result, the recently rotten imperial court's extravagant atmosphere was completely gone. Every official was working hard, fighting for results. They didn't even dare to embezzle. They were afraid that Ning Jiuma would catch them and hang them up in a frying pan. Yes, this cruel emperor really dared to do that. But his cruelty made the lives of the common people better. As for the lack of women in the harem, they needed to choose. Who dared to say it? No one dared to say it. Whoever said it would die. Ning Jiuma dealt with the government affairs expressionlessly. The efficiency of the officials nowadays was terrifying. Everyone wished that they could shorten the time they spent in court to just 1 second. So the emperor and ministers worked together to compress the time of the court to a very short period of time. There was no more flattery because there was no time. He was busy dealing with government affairs. There were no blockbusters singing praises because there was no time. Didn't you see the emperor's sour face? There wasn't a single word of nonsense. If there was something to say it quickly. If there was nothing to say, then slap yourself. Congratulations, the working hours have been shortened. Everyone had holidays now. To Ning Jiuma, being the emperor didn't give him any sense of achievement or happiness. If he didn't want to be the emperor, he could let Ah Wei be the empress. Furthermore, he could collect all kinds of precious medicinal herbs in the palace to nourish Wei Wei Bai. He couldn't wait to give up on government affairs. Ning Jiama walked into the palace, and Zheng Yi immediately came over to help him take off his emperor's robes. He lowered his eyes and said, "Is Ah Wei still not awake?" Zheng Kuang paused for a moment before replying cautiously, "Your Majesty, Her Highness hasn't woken up yet." However, a palace maid said that she saw Her Highness' eyelashes move as if she's about to wake up. Ning Jiama sneered. He didn't say whether he believed it or not. But Zheng Yao felt that Ning Jiama didn't dare to believe it. He had been disappointed so many times that he was on the verge of despair. Ning Jiama suddenly felt a little tired. He stood there in a daze for a while before saying, "You guys can leave. I'll stay with Ah Wei for a while." Zheng Qiao retreated silently. Ning Jiama's footsteps were a little shaky. He looked at the curtains in front of him in a daze. How long had it been since he heard Ah Wei call out to him? Ning Jiama didn't know how long he could hold on. Every day ended in despair and began in anticipation. Chapter 1644. He worked hard to deal with government affairs so that he could empty his mind for some time. He didn't want to break down. Suddenly, he heard the crisp sound of a bell. It was as if someone had pulled open the curtain outside the bed and shook the bell. Ning Jiama felt that he must be hallucinating, but he couldn't help but quicken his steps. He reached out and pulled open the curtain. The beads on the curtain made the person standing by the window suddenly turn around. The jade hairpin in her hair swayed. Under the sunlight, it had a warm luster. Ning Jiama stopped in his tracks and looked at her in a daze. The window was open and the wind blew in, causing her beautiful dress to sway slightly. She held the kite in her hand and revealed a gentle smile. "You put the kite I made by the window. It's so ugly. Luckily, you don't mind." Ning Jiama's lips moved, but he couldn't say anything. Wei Wei Bai held the kite in her hand and turned her head in confusion. "Your Highness! Your Highness!" This form of address caused his tensed heart to immediately collapse and soften. Ning Jiama replied softly, "Yes, Ah Wei." After he said that, he stumbled over and reached out to hold her thin face. Then big tears fell from his eyes. "Ah Wei, why did you only wake up? It's so hard without you protecting me." With that, he hugged her and cried pitifully. Wei Wei Bai, when he was in a vegetative state, she saw him cry every day. She wanted to wake up and stop him from crying. She was tired of seeing him cry like this. But when she woke up, he was still crying. In the future, don't call him Fool Ning. Call him Crybaby Ning. Crybaby Ning complained to her while crying. Those ministers were not good people. Those palace maids and eunuchs were all an eyesore. Without her he would get lost. This palace was too big. He was cold. Wei Wei Bai felt that she had become an old mother again. But for the sake of those annoying videos, she accepted her fate and continued to comfort Ning Jiama. "Ah Wei, don't protect me in the future." "Yes. Let me protect you." He didn't dare and didn't want her to have a second chance to sleep like this. He would rather she did not protect him. As long as her life was smooth and safe. Continuation of The Retarded Crown Prince's Little Palace Maid. The mentally retarded crown prince had become a mentally retarded emperor. It was another rainy season. Wei Wei Bai stepped on wooden clogs and carried the food box to the dilapidated Ning Wang Palace. The green grass in front of the palace gate had long been uprooted and filled with begonia flowers. Wei Wei Bai shook off the water on the umbrella, then put it down and entered the door. Ning Jiama looked up when he heard the voice. He was flying a kite when he saw Wei Wei Bai. He smiled and said, "Ah Wei, look, this is an eagle's kite. I even put a centipede and a mouse on the kite. When the time comes, we'll be able to watch the eagle catch the mouse." Wei Wei Bai saw the lifelike eagle, centipede and mouse. She was speechless at his retarded behavior. Only then did he put the food in the box on the small stove to warm it up. Ning Jiama immediately squeezed over and picked up the fan to fan the fire. He said pitifully, "The imperial kitchen is bullying us again. They sent us cold food." Wei Wei Bai was expressionless. Ning Jiama said, "But it's okay. I have a house full of gold and silver. You can use it to bribe the imperial chef and ask him to stew a chicken for us." Wei Wei Bai held her face with both hands. She was extremely bored. Ning Jiama was a little embarrassed and bumped her shoulder. Ah Wei, why don't you hug me? It's so cold here. Wei Wei bye, oh. Chapter 1645. Ning Jiama looked at her pink side profile and couldn't help but lower his head to kiss her. Bai Weiwei grabbed the palm leaf fan in his hand and hit him on the head with a slap. That's enough. You left such a shabby place for this purpose. From time to time, you would drag me here to reminisce about the past. As an emperor, he didn't do proper things. He spent all his time here. Ning Jiama picked up the warm food and said with a smile, Am I not here to relive our beautiful past? Weiwei Bai, how is it beautiful? The leaky roof or the shabby bed? Ning Jiama pulled her up and held her in his arms. He wrapped his arms around her waist. As long as I come here, I will remember the memories of knowing Ah Wei. Weiwei Bai, I also remember the memory of you rolling on the ground weakly at that time. Ning Jiama, Weiwei Bai, and the beautiful memory of walking upside down with disheveled hair. Ning Jiama, Weiwei Bai, the beautiful memory of seeing a mouse and huddling in the corner in fear, crying and shouting that I was scared. Ning Jiama, suddenly he didn't want to recall the past. It was all his dark history. While Weiwei Bai was still reminiscing about the beautiful past, Ning Jiama immediately reached out and carried her up, easily pressing her down on the creaking old bed. He lowered his head, his breath blowing on her lips. His voice was hoarse and charming. I also remember the beautiful memory of Ah Wei lying under me, panting softly. Weiwei Bai's body stiffened and she reached out to push him. Her fingers were weak. Because for some reason, the high-level minimum wage and the infinite strength conflicted. So after she came back from the dead, the infinite strength disappeared. She couldn't beat Ning Jiama, who had been training himself. Ning Jiama could win against a few Imperial guards now. Subduing her was an easy task. Her weak strength couldn't cause any obstacle to him at all. Ning Jiama looked at her deeply and lowered his head to kiss her. Weiwei Bai complained softly, That's enough, Ning Jiama. Ning Jiama replied faintly, Oh. Then he clasped her fingers tightly, not letting her escape. Her long hair fell apart, and the begonia flower on his hairpin fell to the ground. A small stove in the corner was burning warmly. Ning Jiama felt that he should come here from time to time to relive their beautiful past. It was beautiful and delicious. Mentally retarded emperors are the dividing line between 2 and 3 things. Your Majesty, the Empress has no children. She should choose a consort and add new people to the harem. A new minister said sternly and righteously. Ning Jiama was busy dealing with government affairs and couldn't be bothered to deal with them. Don't talk if there's nothing important. Go down. The minister felt that he had no place to put his loyalty. He knelt down and said, Your Majesty, how can an emperor be without an heir? Who will be entrusted to this country after 100 years? Without an heir to inherit it, there will definitely be a reign of terror, and the people will be plunged into misery and suffering. The other ministers looked at the new minister. He had just been transferred from another city, so his brain was not clear. Then, all the ministers silently took a few steps back to distance themselves from this guy. Ning Jiama was finally annoyed by the nagging. He looked up coldly and a cold light flashed in his eyes. So what if the people are plunged into misery and suffering after I die? What does the reign of terror have to do with me? Wasn't it hard enough when I was on the throne? Do I have to care even after death? The minister looked up blankly and looked at Ning Jiama in confusion. When he was in another city, he heard the praises of the people everywhere. Chapter 1646. In his heart, Ning Jiama was a godlike wise emperor. Why was he so wise? Did all wise emperors have such personality? Ning Jiama picked up the memorial impatiently. You wrote this, right? If you don't know how to write a memorial, then don't write it. I'm annoyed by the nonsense in front. The words at the beginning were his heartfelt praise. They were all the truth. How was it nonsense? The minister looked at him blankly. Ning Jiama threw the memorial at him. Get lost. I'm annoyed when I see you. The minister felt that he was loyal. Even if he was killed, he had to do it for the emperor. Your Majesty, even if you kill me, I still want you to choose. Ning Jiama finally couldn't take it anymore. If Ah Wei hadn't asked him to treat the minister well. Don't scare people with a pot of oil every day. Where did he get the patience to sit here and listen to people's nonsense? Ning Jiama said straightforwardly, I can't do it. I can't do it. Other than the Empress, I want to vomit when I see any woman. The minister, Ning Jiama, are you satisfied? Since you like to choose so much, someone, choose 100 women for him to bring back. The minister was stunned. Ning Jiama got up and said coldly, you bother me with a bunch of meaningless things every day. Ah Wei went to pick the lotus. I didn't make it in time. All of you deserve to die. When he walked out, Ning Jiama didn't forget to add insult to injury. Children? I can't have children in this life because I can't. Such a private matter was a fatal blow to men. His Majesty could actually say it so openly. He was indeed a wise emperor. One of the ministers came over and patted the kneeling foreign minister. Brother, you have to get used to it. This is His Majesty's style. When he met the Empress, he had a crazy personality. The foreign minister cried. His Majesty can't do it. I can't tell good from bad and hurt His Majesty. All the ministers twitched. His Majesty? No one in the world could do it. Those who knew the inside story knew that the Empress was seriously injured and couldn't have children in this life. To protect the Empress, His Majesty spread rumors that he couldn't do it. Everyone knew. For the sake of the Empress, His Majesty was willing to go around biting people. Ning Jiama came to the lakeside and saw a small boat among the slender lotus leaves. The boat was filled with lotus flowers, and Wei Wei Bai was taking a nap with a lotus leaf covering her face. Ning Jiama jumped onto the boat. Wei Wei Bai was shocked. Ning Jiama had already lowered his body, removed the lotus leaf from her face, and kissed her. This kiss was filled with the fragrance of lotus flowers. He kissed Wei Wei Bai so hard that she almost stopped breathing. Ning Jiama's hair was also stuck with lotus petals. He looked up, and his handsome face looked even more mature and reserved after time. But his tone was still childish. Ah Wei, someone wants me to have a child again today. Wei Wei Bai was pinned down by him and could not get up. She reached out and slapped his face away in disdain. If you want to give birth, go ahead. I can't give birth. This guy was getting more and more paranoid. In the past few years, they had surrounded the imperial palace like an iron bucket. She was only satisfied when she went out to play with a group of people. Ning Jiama licked his lips and narrowed his eyes dangerously. I heard that it's more exciting outside and easier to have a baby. Let's try. He clearly knew that she couldn't give birth. It was just an excuse for XX. Wei Wei Bai kicked him, but she couldn't kick him away. She missed the power of infinite strength deeply once again. Ning Jiama held her foot easily. Ah Wei, it's okay if you don't have a child. You have me. Chapter 1647. After he finished speaking, he entangled her again and crushed a few lotuses. I can be your chubby doll. Wei Wei Bai knocked on the system. Does your main system not care about this shameless driver? The system looked at the bullet screen that filled the sky. Where am I going to get my raisins? The retarded emperor followed up with the separation line. Many years later, Ning Jiama carefully held Wei Wei Bai's hand and walked up the stairs. They were dressed in the emperor and empress robes, which were complicated and gorgeous. Under the city walls, there were thousands of noisy people. When they saw the emperor and empress on the city walls, they immediately knelt down and bowed. The mighty waves of "Long Live" came from all directions. Ning Jiama reached out and straightened Wei Wei Bai's collar. Today is the Lantern Festival. Thousands of people are worshipping. I only want to be with you. Wei Wei Bai looked at his white hair and her expression finally softened. She said softly, when I see you I feel old. They were about the same age and both had white hair. Ning Jiama's eyes were full of tenderness and his tone was sincere. My Ah Wei is the most beautiful woman in the world. She never grows old. Wei Wei Bai, I also don't want to grow old. Seeing myself turn into an old woman every day. I reject it. Ning Jiama held her hand and walked to a higher city tower. Thousands of miles of mountains and rivers stretched out under their feet. Ah Wei, no matter how big the mountains and rivers are, It's not as big as when you entered the palace and met me and called me your highness. After so many years, the mountains and rivers were not as big as her smile. If it wasn't for his way, he didn't want anything. He might have been a fatuous ruler long ago. He lit the fire and sent lychees. As long as he could win her favor. Wei Wei Bai turned to look at him and suddenly said softly, "Your Highness." Ning Jama was stunned and his eyes suddenly moistened. He held her hand and kissed it. "Yes, Ah Wei, I'm here. A lifetime wasn't that long. Every day was good. Because you're here. It's over." Wei Wei Bai's head hurt more than ever. She felt that she was in so much pain every time. Sooner or later, her head would change. She struggled to wake up, but her vision was dark. It was time for her to return to reality. In the end, she would die in Ning Jiama's arms. Ning Jiama had been a wise emperor his entire life, and his harem had been empty for his entire life. After she died, he also left this world. Her mission was complete, so the system should have brought her back to reality. Wei Wei Bai struggled to open her eyes. Some golden specks of light appeared out of nowhere. She took a closer look and saw a man standing in the golden light not far away. Golden rays of light fell like snowflakes. His clothes were glowing in the golden light. However, that light was filled with flowing blood. The man's body was tall and slender, but when he stood, he gave people a trembling feeling that he could destroy the world. Wei Wei Bai shouted strangely, "Tongzi, we passed through again?" The system didn't respond. Was it blocked again? Wei Wei Bai felt uneasy. There were so many planes and so long to conquer. The system was her only source of comfort. Even for her, if the system was there. Even if the system didn't do anything, she would still dare to do whatever she wanted as if she had a backing. Suddenly, the man in front of her seemed to have heard her voice. He turned his head slightly and said calmly, "Who are you?" Wei Wei Bai, how should she answer? Where am I going? Chapter 1648. Why was it that when he woke up, he was not in the real world and he did not see the system? Why did he come to such a damned place? Could it be that this scammer in front of him was Tongzi? The system kept nagging him about how handsome he was. Could this be him? Wei Wei Bai thought about it again. No, the system was so familiar with her that they could wear the same pants. How could it not recognize her? Gulp. Something dropped. Bai Wei Wei lowered her head in hindsight, and then she saw a skull looking at her. Wei Wei Bai, who was used to big scenes, remained calm. There seemed to be more than one skull. Humans had blind spots in their vision. If a skull suddenly appeared in a clean area, it would be very dangerous. He saw it immediately. But what if there were many skulls? Wei Wei Bai saw countless bones and skulls beneath her feet, forming a terrifying mountain of bones. At the foot of the mountain, there were countless severed limbs and corpses, and what soaked in them was a boundless sea of blood. Wei Wei Bai also felt a chill in her head. Could there be ghosts in this place? Wei Wei Bai's feet went numb. She took a few steps back and kicked several skulls. She couldn't wait to light the incense. "Big brother or big sister, I didn't kick you on purpose, so don't come looking for me." She was most afraid of ghosts. As for the man, he didn't get an answer and finally turned around. His black hair fell to his waist, fluttering in the wind. Amidst the black hair, his golden eyes were as cold as a bottomless abyss. At the highest point behind him, there was a throne made of white bones. Beside the throne, there was a rusted sword stained with blood. He was like an emperor in the abyss, emotionless and desireless, walking on the path of thousands of corpses. He looked down at the ants beneath his feet. Even though Wei Wei Bai had experienced so many things, in front of this man, she still couldn't accept it. She also felt an uncontrollable fear in her heart. It was as if she was just a skull beside his feet that he could crush at any time. It was higher than where he stood. She was under his feet. Wei Wei Bai suddenly felt that if he exerted force with his foot, the skull under his feet would collapse and bury her alive. The man stood there like a deity, without a shred of humanity. However, he spoke again. "Who are you?" This sentence was not as emotionless as it had been the first time. Instead, there was a trace of emotion that was so faint that it was almost undetectable. Wei Wei Bai had a strange intuition that she couldn't answer. If he answered, something bad would happen. Therefore, Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but take a few steps back. Without the system, she couldn't do anything. He had to be careful and protect himself. The man suddenly moved. He slowly walked down, and with each step, a skull shattered. Wei Wei Bai felt a headache for those skeletons. The man was quite a distance away. Other than a pair of eyes that were as exquisite as a work of art, Wei Wei Bai couldn't see his face clearly. When she saw him walking over, she couldn't help but take a few steps back. However, this could not shorten the distance between the two of them. The man was walking very slowly, but he was very stubborn. Step by step, he shortened the distance between the two of them. He slowly stretched out his hand, and there was a clear red line on his wrist. Wei Wei Bai felt a tightness on her wrist. She looked down and saw that there was a red line on her wrist too. What was this thing? Come here. The man's voice was faint and deep, with a force that couldn't be refused. Wei Wei Bai felt a huge force on her wrist. Chapter 1649. She was dragged forward and was about to be dragged to the man's side. Wei Wei Bai immediately used her feet to block the gap between the skeleton mountain. There were so many bones. This man must be a man-eating monster. She would be eaten if she went over. The man's voice was suppressed and unhappy. Why are you resisting? Come over. Wei Wei Bai was about to speak when her eyebrows jumped. She suddenly saw the man's face clearly. Yi Yuxuan? But before Wei Wei Bai could see more clearly, a monstrous red flame burst out from the dark world. The flame was like a giant dragon, rushing towards Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai, she was going to be roasted into steak. Then she was hit by the giant fire dragon. A raging sea of fire burned on the skeleton mountain, and Wei Wei Bai disappeared in the flames. The man was originally calm, but when he saw the weak soul suddenly disappear, he stood there silently for a long time before slowly returning to the mountain top. He sat on the seat of bones, his eyes indifferent and calm as he looked at the raging sea of blood. Then he gently raised his hand. The sea of fire was crushed by a force that could destroy everything. The red flame turned into a speck of light and disappeared in the boundless golden light. The world returned to darkness. He sat for a while before strangely reaching out to touch his chest. What did he feel like he had lost? Who was that weak soul? And the red line in his hand was glowing with a golden light, faintly flowing with a paranoid force. The system hugged Wei Wei Bai's soul. Mother, Wei Wei Bai almost couldn't come back. When it carried Wei Wei Bai through the soul passage, she was gone in the blink of an eye. It was the first time it lost its host's soul. It was so scared that it burst into tears. The host's soul was more fragile than anyone else's. If it was lost like this, any space-time turbulence could take her life. The system was going crazy looking for her, but suddenly it saw the fate roulette and thought of something before rushing into the golden light. As expected, she was taken away by Yi Yuxuan's power. Yi Yuxuan's unawakened power was becoming stronger and stronger. This power was in the depths of his soul, and it became more and more obvious as his emotions grew. The place where Wei Wei Bai had just entered. It was in the depths of Yi Yuxuan's soul. In that world that belonged only to Yi Yuxuan's power. And in that world, only Yi Yuxuan's ignorant consciousness existed. That consciousness was born from Yi Yuxuan's obsession. If Wei Wei Bai had answered Yi Yuxuan's question just now, then Yi Yuxuan remembered who she was. Wei Wei Bai couldn't come back at all. Yi Yuxuan's feelings were twisted by the accumulation of feelings from so many planes. In his subconscious, there was only one terrifying obsession. He wanted to keep Wei Wei Bai. Even if he wanted to keep her soul, he wanted to keep her. So Wei Wei Bai's soul was almost swallowed up by Yi Yuxuan's powerful soul power. There was a kind of love that ate your soul. We merged into one. It was all love. The system hugged the weak Wei Wei Bai's soul tightly and cursed in a low voice. Yi Yuxuan, you're sick. Control your power. Sooner or later, the host will die because of you. Yi Yuxuan himself definitely didn't want to hurt Wei Wei Bai. But he couldn't stop his power from going out of control. This time, the host's soul was almost left in the depths of Yi Yuxuan's soul and couldn't come back. The system saw the boundary between reality and immediately rushed over, stepping on red fireworks. She fell asleep quietly. The system stuffed her soul into her body. To make it easier for you to read it next time, you can click. Chapter 1650. Then it finally let out a sigh of relief. It had to quickly accumulate life points for this lifetime. If it ran into the depths of Yi Yuxuan's soul a few more times and was detained by Yi Yuxuan's power, it would never be able to reincarnate. The host would never be able to reincarnate and would remain in Yi Yuxuan's soul forever, enduring the pain of imprisonment for eternity. Just thinking about it made the system tremble. The system suddenly heard the sound of slow footsteps and it immediately shrank back. The cold bamboo curtain was lifted by a snow-white slender finger. The furnishings in Ashi's house were all in an ancient style. Even the bed was an ancient carved bed. Yi Yuxuan walked out from behind the bamboo curtain. He looked at Wei Wei Bai on the bed and his eyes softened for a moment. He had an incomparably long dream. But it was good. He lowered his head and looked at the red line on his wrist. The line was much thicker and firmer. And the end of the red line was tied to her slender white wrist. Yi Yuxuan walked over, took a thick blanket, and tightly wrapped her up. He was going home today. Yi Yuxuan easily carried her up, even though she had slept so many times. Her body was still in good condition. Even, after a detailed examination of her body, he found that her heart was slowly recovering. Yi Yuxuan was not surprised, as long as everything was going well. He tried not to stop it. After Yi Yuxuan walked out, Ashi stood at the door. "Mr. Yi, come more often when you have time." He waved his small handkerchief and said with a flattering smile. Yi Yuxuan looked at him indifferently, then nodded. "The red line needs to be strengthened?" Ashi immediately said, "If there are no accidents, come back once every 6 months. I will check the strength of the red line for you. If it is weak, we will immediately carry out the strengthening ceremony." After saying that, Ashi pinched his fingers and calculated. His eyebrows twitched. Why was the red line so thick? He wasn't that powerful to be able to change the fate of the red line of fate to such an extent. Not to mention that it was a red string, it was more like a chain. What kind of monster had he tied the red line of marriage to? Ashi calmly put his finger back and continued to smile warmly. "You're welcome to come again. Any kind of monster would do. The rich were the masters." Yi Yuxuan took note of it seriously. As a 10,000-year-old bachelor, he was very careful about his own marriage. Then he carried his partner and got into the car. Seeing the car drive away, the smile on Ashi's face slowly disappeared. "Master?" The little disciple beside him called out in confusion. Ashi sighed. "I feel like I'm being forced into prostitution." Although Wei Wei Bai was a dead person, she was not like Yi Yuxuan. This was the fate of a 10,000-year-old single dog. In fact, Wei Wei Bai's facial features were that of exuberant peach blossoms and a doting red star. If Yi Yuxuan had not forcefully tied the red string, Wei Wei Bai's own marriage would definitely not have any problems. However, with Yi Yuxuan's forceful binding, Wei Wei Bai's marriage would be tied to Yi Yuxuan's in the future. All of Wei Wei Bai's subsequent choices were cut off. The little disciple asked in confusion, "Is there any side effect of tying the red string?" Ashi, ordinary people's red strings are very fragile. They can be broken or tied at will. Very few people's red strings can last for a lifetime. Red strings were not what ordinary people thought. Being tied was a matter of a lifetime. But when one was moved, the red string would appear. When one did not love, the red string would automatically break. There were many red strings in a person's life. However, Yi Yuxuan's red string was terrifyingly thick. If there was no external force to tear it forcefully. Address of the full text, https://www. Sashu. Com download address of the Chapter 1651. Don't think that you can break it by yourself. If the red string doesn't break, the biggest consequence is that the affair won't succeed. Because you will lose the opportunity to connect with other people. That girl will never be moved by other people in her life. Even if she is moved, there will never be any fate. She was completely trapped in the red string, locked together with Yi Yuxuan. That was why Asya sighed. He was holding such a fragile red string. Why did the red string become an iron chain? If he knew, he would have added more money. After all, the quality was so good. It would be a loss if he didn't add more money. Wei Wei Bai woke up as soon as she got on the plane. She cursed the system first. I told you to show me the video of the teacher and the student. It turned out that the teacher was tutoring the student for 3 years and the college entrance exam for 5 years. I told you to show the doctor and the nurse. It turned out to be a video of the vet and the nurse giving birth to the calf. I told you to show the male nanny and the housewife. It turned out that the male nanny taught you how to fix the water pipe. There was also the housewife teaching you how to scramble eggs with tomatoes. All right, the male nanny and the housewife were 2 different videos. They couldn't be put together at all. The system rubbed its nose. This isn't as bad as anti-pornography. It's better to watch documentaries to stay safe. Didn't it want to watch it? It wanted to watch it. But if it was caught, it would be caught and fined. It only had so much money, and it was still waiting to eat. If it was fined, what would it use to buy snacks? Wei Wei Bai suddenly remembered. Oh right, I also had a strange nightmare. I dreamed that Yu Xuan was sitting on a mountain of bones, pulling the red string in his hand, wanting to pull me over. That was Yi Yuxuan's paranoid consciousness in the depths of his soul. Of course, he wanted to pull you over. If he pulled you over, you would be locked in a cage of bones, unable to get out. The system pursed its lips, not daring to make a sound. Wei Wei Bai reached out and covered her head. This dream is too strange. Could it be that in her subconscious, Yi Yuxuan was a homicidal maniac? Otherwise, why would it be a sea of bones in her dream? Suddenly, an ice-cold index finger pressed against her temple. Wei Wei Bai, who was already having a headache, shuddered at the cold touch. She looked up and saw Yi Yuxuan. Yi Yuxuan was not around just now. She seemed to have gone out for a while. He lowered his eyes. Under his thick eyelashes, his eyes were calm and unperturbed. He's awake. It was a plain and simple sentence, without any unnecessary emotions. Wei Wei Bai glanced at the table next to her. He brought a few glasses of water, one of which was ice water. Yi Yuxuan reached out her finger again and touched the ice water with her fingertips. Then she used the cold on her index finger to press on her temple. This greatly alleviated her headache. Wei Wei Bai stared at him, her clear eyes filled with confusion. It was as if he was still in a daze from the long experience of the plane. The system curled up in the trash can and ate the dried mango. Although it made Wei Wei Bai vague and emotional, shielding to deal with the aftereffects to the greatest extent. But Wei Wei Bai had just returned to reality. She was definitely still in a daze. This was also the aftereffect of a lifetime of transmigration. Yi Yuxuan looked at her in a daze. Suddenly, he could not help but smile. His smile was bright and beautiful. His calm eyes were also dyed with a beautiful light. Wei Wei Bai was stunned for a while before she collected all the things in reality. She said softly, Yi Yuxuan. Yi Yuxuan said lightly, yes. Wei Wei Bai asked, where is this? Yi Yuxuan said softly, beside me. /T. Chapter 1652. Wei Wei Bai. His flirting was too obvious. She was actually speechless for a moment. Yi Yuxuan said meaningfully, in the future, every minute you wake up, you will be by my side. She was wrong. How was this flirting? This was a pervert's line. However, seeing that he was handsome, Wei Wei Bai actually felt a little sweet. Wei Wei Bai immediately suppressed her restless heart. She wanted to flirt with a man the moment she came back. She hadn't gained enough life points yet. How could she be so unambitious and be moved so easily? Wei Wei Bai coughed softly. She was about to ask him not to work so hard and massage her temples. Yi Yuxuan had already let go of her hand and picked up a cup of warm water beside him. Drink some. Wei Wei Bai quickly reached out to take it. The cup in Yi Yuxuan's hand did not move at all. The two of them held the same cup and stared at each other. Just as Wei Wei Bai felt that the atmosphere was right and they were about to kiss. Yi Yuxuan slowly lowered his head as expected. His eyes darkened. Wei Wei Bai, did he think that she would avoid such a small scene? Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but pinch the blanket on her body with the fingers of her other hand. When Yi Yuxuan's lips were only a few centimeters away from her, he raised the cup. The thin edge of the cup touched her lips. His eyes narrowed slightly. Open your mouth. Wei Wei Bai was a little confused and actually opened her mouth. He naturally fed her a mouthful of water. Bai Weiwei felt that this rhythm, why did it feel like he was in control? She drank 2 mouthfuls and stepped back, not drinking anymore. Yi Yuxuan did not continue to feed her. Instead, he drank the rest of the water in 1 gulp as if nothing had happened. This action. He was so familiar with her that Wei Wei Bai was speechless. Yi Yuxuan said, "Your father will come to pick you up, and so will Qin Qiu." Wei Wei Bai was at a loss for a moment. It seemed like she had not seen Bai Changyan for a long time. Actually, in reality, her father had been tricked by Yi Yuxuan into going on a trip to find his second love. It hadn't been long since then. But because it took too long to travel through several planes in a row, she now had an illusory sense of reality. Even stepping on the ground was a little unnatural. Wei Wei Bai looked at Yi Yuxuan in a daze. She wondered if her sense of reality would return if she saw more people in real life. Yi Yuxuan was wearing a simple white shirt and sitting on the sofa. He hadn't changed much. It was still clean and good-looking. Even the way he held the cup and drank water with his head tilted back was sexy. Because they were on a private jet, the sofas were not far from each other. As long as he leaned forward, he would be able to touch her. Wei Wei Bai looked at him generously, from head to toe, from his eyes to his lips. From his lips to his collarbone under his collar. As she looked, her mind gradually became clear. She was finally back. Wei Wei Bai slowly exhaled, and her cheeks just puffed up twice. A pair of hands suddenly cupped her face, and her lips were occupied by a warm breath. Yi Yuxuan lowered his head and kissed her. The intertwining of lips and tongues was gentle and long. Her breath was blocked and she actually choked on it. Yi Yuxuan kissed her very seriously. His lips were moist from the warmth of the water, as well as tender and cherishing feelings. Wei Wei Bai reached out and grabbed the back of his collar. She wanted to pull him away. But he didn't care and kissed her slowly and delicately. This kiss completely chased away the confusion in Wei Wei Bai's mind. To make it easier for you to read it next time, you can click. Chapter 1653. In the end, Wei Wei Bai had no choice but to reach out and pinch Yi Yuxuan's face, twisting it hard. Yi Yuxuan had no choice but to stop his indecent behavior. Shut up. Wei Wei Bai frowned. Yi Yuxuan's calm face showed a trace of innocence. You keep looking at me. I thought you were regretting that I didn't kiss you just now. Wei Wei Bai, she had no words to say. Was she that obvious just now? But Yi Yuxuan's interruption swept away the sense of loss and confusion in her heart. The plane landed quickly. Wei Wei Bai's body was in good condition. She asked Yi Yuxuan, "What exactly does that ashi do? Are you taking me to a fortune teller to have my fortune told?" Yi Yuxuan didn't seem like a superstitious person. Even if he saw that there were ghosts in this world, this kind of man's first reaction would be to catch the ghost and dissect it to study what it was. Yi Yuxuan's cheeks were half red from being pinched. He turned back and said, "Yes, it's fate." Wei Wei Bai, this reason was a little strong. Yi Yuxuan added calmly, "Let's see if our birth characters are compatible." Wei Wei Bai, "What's the point of that?" Yi Yuxuan, "It's a tradition. In the past, people would calculate this before they got married." Wei Wei Bai said that she wanted to break off the engagement, and she didn't want a date for the time being. Yi Yuxuan didn't hear it at all. He still did what he wanted, walking on the road of, "I want to date Wei Wei." Wei Wei Bai had already given up on correcting Yi Yuxuan's idea of getting married at the drop of a hat. She couldn't help but be curious. Then, are we compatible? They had already gotten off the plane. From afar, he could see Qin Qiu and Bai Changyan talking about something. Yi Yuxuan glanced at his future father-in-law. He said softly, "We didn't get along at first." He told the truth. According to the fortune teller, he was born to be at odds with no one. Wei Wei Bai, that was too straightforward. Shouldn't one say that they're compatible when picking up girls? What kind of fortune teller would say that she was going to earn money? What kind of fortune teller would say that they were not compatible? Where could they earn money? Yi Yuxuan reached out to hold her hand and walked forward. Wei Wei Bai also regained her senses. You didn't get along in the beginning, but now you're saying that you're together? Yi Yuxuan turned around. There was a strange gentleness on her face under the sunlight. That's right. I threw money at the fortune teller and he said that we are a match made in heaven. Wei Bai, this scheme was so deep that he was caught off guard and stepped into a pit. Was he showing off how rich he was? Wei Bai finally squeezed out a sentence. As long as you're happy. Yi Yuxuan's fingers tightened. His grip made her fingertips a little red. He turned his head. His side profile was incomparably handsome, and the corners of his mouth gently curved into a smile. I'm happy. I'm really happy. Throughout their long lifetime together, he was happy every single day. He held her hand, and a red thread wrapped tightly around their wrists. If they could be together like this for a lifetime, Yi Yuxuan felt that he was willing to pay any price. Bai Weiwei felt that the strength of his handshake was too great. But seeing his rare relaxed look, she didn't know why, but she didn't say anything. When they walked in, they heard Bai Changyan say, "She lied to me. She clearly has more than 10 boyfriends, but she lied to me and said that she only loves me." Qin Qiu held a handkerchief and patted the sobbing Bai Changyan. "In-law, it's not that I want to criticize you, but you're already so old. How can you still be deceived by a woman?" Chapter 1654. Bai Changyan, I just saw her. She looks like Weiwei's mother. Qin Qiu sighed. How can this be? Isn't this looking for a substitute? Your moral awareness is not high. Bai Changyan, but she said she didn't care. Qin Qiu, she lied to you. What were you cheated of? Bai Changyan, 1 million. Qin Qiu, it's not much. You just buy a lesson. Wei Bai was in a trance for a moment. 1 million is a lot. How many people can't earn 1 million in their lifetime? You prodigal father. You were cheated just like that? Of course, Wei Bai quickly reacted. 1 million was really not much for the Bai family. At least it was within the range that they could easily bear. She sighed for a moment. She was a good young lady, because she had been traveling for a long time. She had become poor. Not to mention calculating a few cents every day, she was getting more and more stingy. It was all the poor system's fault. She spent every day with a poor ghost system. Originally, she had a majestic, generous, and free personality. She became a person who haggled over every little thing. Don't even think about getting a cent from her. It was all the system's fault. Qin Qiu wiped Bai Changyan's tears and comforted him. Well, next time you find a woman, keep your eyes open. Do you want me to check for you? Bai Changyan said sadly, I won't find one in the future. I can't stand being cheated again and again. Wei Bai looked at the two guys in front of her. The atmosphere was unusually harmonious. Yi Yuxuan lowered his voice. 1 million has been recovered and credited to your account. Wei Bai, recovered? Yi Yuxuan lowered his head and looked at her. Well, I recovered. But don't tell your father. Let him buy a lesson. Wei Bai had a look of, wait a minute. Don't think that she forgot that it was Yi Yuxuan who instigated her father to have a second love. As a result, her father was cheated. The 1 million that Yi Yuxuan recovered was actually just compensation. She didn't seem to be moved. When Bai Changyan saw Wei Bai, he immediately rushed over excitedly. Wei, Daddy misses you so much. Yi Yuxuan lifted his long legs, stretched out his long arms, and grabbed the stupefied Qin Qiu. Then she shoved it in front of Wei Bai. Bai Changyan immediately hugged Qin Qiu. The two of them bumped into each other and were immediately stunned. Wei Bai was already prepared to accept her father's loving hug, but she was also stunned. The only one who was still conscious was Yi Yuxuan. She indifferently put her arm around his shoulder and said, Hello, father-in-law. Wei and I have something to do, so we'll leave first. With that, he dragged Wei Bai away. Wei Bai, wait, Yi Yuxuan said, no. When Wei Bai was shoved into the car, Yi Yuxuan also squeezed in. Then, Wei Bai saw her father and Qin Qiu chasing after the car. Yi Yuxuan, you son of a bitch. How can you drive away with just one car? We'll walk back. Qin Qiu's voice also came, in-law, we can take the bus. Bai Changyan said, I haven't hugged my daughter yet to comfort my hurt heart. Qin Qiu said, "It's okay, I'll give you a hug." Wei Wei Bai. The relationship between Qin Qiu and her father seemed to be getting better and better. Suddenly, her face was turned back and she met Yuxuan's deep eyes. "Don't look too far. If you look too much, you'll be far-sighted." Wei Wei Bai was speechless by this statement. Godlike people would be far-sighted. The car drove into the hospital and they directly went through a full body checkup. This was a routine physical examination, comprehensive but efficient. Chapter 1655. There were a few private checks done by female doctors. Yi Yuxuan was also isolated outside. The system finally dared to speak. "Your health points have increased again. Let's not talk about the deductions or rewards from those planes. Now you have about 5,000 health points." In any case, Yi Yuxuan's feelings for Wei Wei Bai would only increase her health points. It would definitely not deduct anything. So the system did not say anything and continued to increase her health points. For the rest of the time, it was better to be as low-key as possible. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a moment. "Yi Yuxuan really likes me." This sentence was a statement. There was no doubt. Her heart of stone was in the plane. In reality, she was careful with every step she took. She was afraid that if she really fell for him, she would fall for him. Then her life would be short. System, is that liking? He liked her so much that he couldn't help it. Wei Wei Bai said, "I'm really loved by everyone. I don't spend much time with Yi Yuxuan, but he keeps flirting with me. He doesn't even think about how I'm a medicine pot, an intermittent vegetable. Why doesn't he dislike me?" She really had feelings for Yi Yuxuan. That surge of feelings was a little strange. Love at first sight was rare. In the beginning, the two of them were in a state of, "You don't want to see me, I don't want to see you." Why did it suddenly change? The system saw that Wei Wei Bai was deep in thought. It was afraid that she would think of something, so it immediately said, "Feelings can't be explained. If he loves you, he loves you. Maybe one day he won't love you anymore." Wei Wei Bai repeated softly, "Won't love me anymore?" The system said, "Health points are the most important. Believe in your health points." Wei Wei Bai nodded. "That's true. I'll try to get enough health points as soon as possible, then I'll chase after Yi Yuxuan." The atmosphere was very quiet. Wei Wei Bai realized that she was being too natural, so she voiced out her thoughts. She immediately defended herself. "My life doesn't belong to Yi Yuxuan. I'll repay the favor of my life with my body." The system asked, "What if Yi Yuxuan has a face full of pockmarks and wrinkles?" Wei Wei Bai, "Haha, am I the kind of person who cares about appearance? I've seen so many storms and waves, how can I be so superficial?" Wei Wei Bai, well, she also felt that she was a little shameless. But then she remembered that the man with the pockmarked face was called Yi Yuxuan. It didn't seem that unbearable after all. Wei Wei Bai immediately stopped her deep thoughts. If he continued to think about it, his life would really be short. Yi Yuxuan sat on a chair in the corridor. He looked at the door calmly. Wei Wei Bai was checking inside. His physical condition was getting better and better. Yi Yuxuan's calm mind was constantly calculating. He calculated the progress of her case. He calculated the speed of her heart healing bit by bit. He also calculated the life they had experienced. Yi Yuxuan's fingers moved. In the end he sighed. There are still many more times before you can truly recover. Her heart should have something to do with the strange thing that brought her to experience those worlds. Every time it healed, it would only happen when she woke up. He suddenly realized that she actually used the shortest amount of time to make him fall in love with her. Then she simply turned around and left, leaving him alone in that world to suffer so much that he wished he was dead. Actually, that was the best for her, because it saved the most time. If she accompanied him for a lifetime every time, then she would have to stay for a very, very long time. Only then could she heal herself. The last 2 times she accompanied him for a lifetime, when he calmly watched from the side. Quick download. Chapter 1656. It wasn't that he didn't see the tiredness and exhaustion in her eyes. She had never been moved. This knowledge made Yi Yuxuan's fingers tremble. He forced himself to take a deep breath, suppressing the terrible pain. Then he calmly continued to analyze. Her purpose was to live. Then feelings were the things she ranked after. And he ranked first for her. The second was to live. They were not fair from the beginning. So she actually ranked living first and refused to be moved. When she was really healed, then he would be in the emotional world that she ranked second. Must be first. By Chang Yen or anyone else. He had to be first. Yi Yuxuan crossed his hands and looked indifferently at the lights in the corridor. He didn't feel that his childish ranking was not in line with his identity. The destruction of multiple planes had made his character changeable and complicated. Bai Changyan and Qin Qiu finally squeezed in the bus and rushed to the hospital. Entering the hospital corridor, they saw Yi Yuxuan sitting in a chair with a deep face, staring at the door of the examination room. Even if it was a hospital chair, he could sit like an emperor. Qin Qiu, Wei, a lot of the examinations are done by me. I'll go in and help with the examination first. Yi Yuxuan looked up, stretched out his long legs and blocked the door. Qin Qiu, Bai Changyan, who is this childish ghost? Are you using your long legs to do such meaningless things? Qin Qiu was sluggish for a moment before he reacted. It should be some more private examination. This private standard was set by Yi Yuxuan. In any case, a personal inspection was all done in private. Bai Changyan also wanted to condemn Yi Yuxuan for kicking them away and leaving by himself. As a result, Yi Yuxuan looked up, his cold eyes were bottomless. A gust of cold wind blew past. Bai Changyan sat down quietly. The relatives also sat quietly. For a moment, the three big men were all silent. Only Wei Bai was left. Then the whole family would be. The system was still chatting with Wei Bai. Your heart is much better now because as your HP increases, your body will also become healthier. Seeing that the examination was almost done, Wei Bai got up from the bed. She thanked the doctor. The doctor was also happy that she was in good health. Yi Yuxuan was still waiting for her outside the door. Wei Bai hesitated for a moment and decided not to go out. She said, "In the next plane, it won't be forever, right?" The system replied, "In theory, there's a high probability that it won't." Twice was equivalent to a lifetime. It was all Yi Yuxuan's luck and his stubbornness that had forcefully tampered with it. But both times there were loopholes. Last time he had used the lottery. Last time he had made use of the error of the side quest. In the next plane he wouldn't be so unlucky as to be caught by Yi Yuxuan, would he? Bai Wei was deep in thought. She thought about it. How much is my life value now? The system replied, 5,300. Wei Bai asked, how many external HP can my body store? She didn't expect the reward from the plane. She gave the system 20 days worth of HP and all kinds of little things. As a result, she didn't have any rewards left in each plane. To be exact, they were all deducted. The system replied, 5,500. Wei Bai nodded. Yi Yuxuan's HP now is very easy to get, right? The system replied, very easy. For example, if you go out and give him a kiss, I promise you 5,500 immediately. / to make it easier for you to read next time, you can click Save. Chapter 1657. Yi Yuxuan was now fully open to Wei Bai. When they first started, Yi Yuxuan was still wary of Wei Bai. It was the kind of deep wariness that came from the depths of her soul. It made life points particularly difficult to get. Now, in the depths of Yi Yuxuan's soul, let alone guarding against Wei Bai. She didn't see when they passed through the soul channel. That ignorant power consciousness in the depths of Yi Yuxuan's soul. Was it going to make a move to snatch her away? Now, in the depths of Yi Yuxuan's soul, it was full of paranoid love for Wei Bai. Even if Wei Bai didn't do anything as long as she was awake, her life points would keep soaring. But her soul storage ability was not good. She could only rely on each plane transmigration to expand the storage space. Now, it was transmigrating with Wei Bai. It didn't care about the dozens of life points reward at all. It only cared about the ability to expand the storage of external life points. Wei Bai touched her heart. I'm really worried about myself. Her always indifferent expression finally showed a trace of wavering. I'm tempted. The system was silent for a moment before saying softly, soon, Wei Wei, you've already gained more than 10 years of life. Soon, you'll be able to live happily until you're old. Every time the host called her Wei Wei, it wasn't extreme worry. It was extreme warmth. Wei Wei Bai put her finger down from her chest and said to the system with a smile, I can still continue to fight and fight for 100 years of longevity. People have to be responsible for themselves before they can bear the burden of other people's lives. So, I can only apologize to Yi Yuxuan first. System, why do I feel so sentimental all of a sudden? When the host became serious and emotional, it really made its eyes hazy with tears. Wei Wei Bai, take me away once my 5,500 life points are full. The less time he had to face Yi Yuxuan, the better. In the past, he wanted to stay a little longer. It would be dangerous to stay here any longer. The system was silent for a while before it said, okay. When Yi Yuxuan heard the door open, he moved his leg away as if nothing had happened. Just as he was about to get up, Wei Wei Bai had already walked to his side and placed her hand on his shoulder. Yi Yuxuan looked up. His face was still swollen. It was caused by Wei Wei Bai. The man's face was pale to begin with, so the redness and swelling were exceptionally conspicuous. Wei Wei Bai reached out her finger and gently stroked the red and swollen area. Does it still hurt? She asked in a low voice. Yi Yuxuan wanted to say that it didn't hurt, but for some reason she said, it hurts. There was a hint of coquettishness in her calm tone. Qin Qiu and Bai Changyan tilted their bodies, straightened their necks, and watched the two sweet dogs show off their affection. Wei Wei Bai originally wanted to be gentle. After all, this concerned her HP. But if it was too gentle, she was worried that she wouldn't be able to control her heart. Finally, Wei Wei Bai gently placed her fingers on his face. It was the side of his face that was fine. She pinched hard and said expressionlessly, give up, Yi Yuxuan. Don't be so fond of me. At least, don't be so fond of me now. She was doing it for his own good. She was not a good person. So he could be fond of her in the future. Wait until she had enough HP. He would immediately wash his hands of the golden basin and would never do anything to the red apricot grassland. Yi Yuxuan's face turned red. He silently reached out and touched his face. Then he couldn't help but laugh. Well, whatever you say is good. The system and Wei Wei Bai, they felt like they had met a masochist. Bai Changyan couldn't understand what the young couple was doing. He couldn't help but ask Qin Qiu softly. Qin Qiu coldly snorted, they're showing off their love. Chapter 1658. Bai Changyan suddenly realized. Were all young people showing off their love so unique these days? So the two men tilted their heads and looked at them. Wei Wei Bai looked at her old father and her attending doctor. She couldn't help but say to Qin Qiu, I think your Xian needs to have his mental condition checked sometimes. It wasn't the first time she had doubts. Yi Yu's personality changes were unchanging and ever-changing. Unchanging was referring to his facial paralysis. Ever-changing was referring to his personality. Why did he change every 3 days? Qin Qiu couldn't help but remind Wei Wei, he has always been sick before you came. He was sick since birth, not just today. As for his personality changes, he didn't seem to change at all. He had a cold face every day as if everything was an ant. It was only Wei Wei Bai who changed. But this was more normal because all fools in love were like this. The system secretly whispered to Wei Wei Bai. It's full, let's go. Wei Wei Bai smiled and then sat next to Yi Yuxuan. The family sat neatly on the chairs in the hospital corridor. Then Wei Wei Bai leaned her head on Yi Yuxuan's shoulder and slowly closed her eyes and fell asleep. Yi Yuxuan didn't say anything and didn't ask her to stay. He even heard that thing say, it's full, let's go. What was it? Was it her lifespan, ability, or something that could make her body healthy? Gone. She was gone. Yi Yuxuan slowly reached out and gently touched her face. Then he whispered, waiting for you to come back. Again and again, waiting for you to come back. Bai Changyan sat on the outermost side and couldn't see his daughter clearly. He tilted his head and asked curiously, what's the situation? Why didn't they say anything? Wasn't the checkup done? Qin Qiu, showing off their love. Bai Changyan, Oh. This young man was so low-key when showing off his love. In the empty, abandoned classroom, under the dim candlelight, there were various messy lines on a piece of snow-white paper. The lines of the ink brush. It was a strange mess. Circles of lines were drawn by the hands of the three people. Wei Wei Bai opened her eyes and saw that she was holding a pen in her hand. Opposite her was a girl with a frightened expression. She was also holding a pen. At the top of the pen was a slender, jade-like, snow-white finger with delicate joints. Wei Wei Bai looked up. It was a boy. He was sitting down and his figure looked thin, but if one were to estimate his height, he would be at least 1.75 meters tall. The cold moonlight shone in through the broken window. On his face, there was a veil of light and shadow. His delicate porcelain skin was devoid of blood. However, it was exceptionally smooth and beautiful. Around him were a few students in school uniforms who were also scared. Heavenly Master, you have to save us. That's right, Xiao Nian is already dead. If we can't invite the pen spirit back, we'll be the next ones to die. A few students were crying and complaining at the same time. Heavenly Master? Wei Wei Bai was confused for a moment. What's going on now? The system said, the memory is stuck. The memory transfer failed. Let me read it out loud. Wei Wei Bai, has the system been reduced from an intelligent system to a manual system? Wei Wei Bai pulled her attention away from the chattering students. The system had already started the introduction. The good-looking young man next to you is the target of your mission in this world. Wei Wei Bai immediately looked up at him. Transmigration system. Adonis, come over here. Transmigration system. Adonis, come over here. / transmigration system. Adonis, come over here. Transmigration system. Adonis, come over here. Transmigration system. Adonis, come over here. Chapter 1659. The young man pursed his thin lips, his beautiful black eyes seemed to be filled with an enchanting mist. He felt Wei Wei by looking at him and could not help but look up with curiosity. The system said, his name is Yu Moqian, 18 years old, first year of university. Luckily he was 18 years old, or else Wei Wei Bai would not be able to eat him. The young man looked younger than his actual age. He was like the cherry blossoms in early spring, faint and enchanting, but strangely fragile. Wei Wei Bai thought that the target of this world was not bad. He was a junior in university, a little fresh meat, pure and innocent. He looked like someone who would be easy to gain favorability with. The system said, you are now inviting the pen spirit. Wei Wei Bai thought, I have a bad feeling. As someone who was afraid of the dark and ghosts, she always stayed away from these supernatural things. Wei Wei Bai said with a trembling voice, why do we need to invite the pen spirit? The system said, it's like this. You are a direct descendant of the imperial path in this world. You are a Taoist priest, you know, the kind that often catches ghosts. Wei Wei Bai's teeth ached when she heard this. It was like a person who was afraid of snakes suddenly being told one day, you are in charge of catching snakes. And you are already squatting in front of a poisonous snake, ready to reach into the hole to catch it. You haven't even seen the snake, but your hands are already weak. Wei Wei Bai felt like this, weak hands. The system read out the information. Although you are a direct descendant, you are not born with the ability to catch ghosts. Your skills are no different from normal people. You are basically just eating and waiting for death. Your main source of income is live streaming to cheat money. No, live streaming to make people watch. Wei Wei Bai thought, cheating money and live streaming are not the same. The system said, but didn't the Guo family get rid of feudal superstitions recently? Your streaming room was banned, so you can only accept a ghost-catching mission to pay for next month's rent. Wei Wei Bai said, this ghost-catching Taoist priest is doing too badly. These days, great deity jumping? Wait, why is Taoist priest great deity jumping? This Taoist priest was too weak. The system replied, that's because it's at the level of eating and drinking. This ghost-catching mission was done by these 7 students. They couldn't think straight and came to this abandoned classroom to play pen spirit. The system nagged. Wei Wei Bai finally had a general understanding of this plane. It was just that she was a Taoist priest in this plane who was good at catching ghosts. However, she didn't have the ability to do so at all. She was just a freeloader. Recently, the live stream room had been banned, and the tools to cheat others were gone. She had no choice but to come out and catch the ghost. There weren't many ghosts these days. After all, it was a lie to say that a dead person would become a ghost. Since ancient times, so many people had died, but they were all stuck in the human world. Layers upon layers of ghosts had already floated 10,000 times around the earth. A ghost that was stuck in the human world. Firstly, it had spirit chi and was nurtured by a spiritual item with great luck. Even if these ghosts had no resentment in their hearts. He had never harmed anyone. They wouldn't be attracted by the gates of hell, and they wouldn't be captured by the netherworld's ghost servants. This was the best kind of ghost. Secondly, it was a malicious ghost. It had to be the kind of ghost that had a huge resentment and was filled with hatred for this world. This kind of ghost often encountered injustice and died miserably. Example, Sadako Kayako. So scary. This kind of ghost was often an earthbound spirit, bound to wander around the place where they died miserably, killing people to fill their appetite. And these 7 sad first-year students had listened to the school ghost story. They had agreed to come to the place where the ghost story happened to test their courage. To put it bluntly, it was men and women on a date. Full text download to facilitate your next reading. You can click on the Chapter 1660. It was said that in this locked-down teaching building, a senior was cheated by a scumbag and got pregnant. In the end, the scumbag abandoned her. She had a miscarriage again. In a moment of depression, she jumped off the building in red. After jumping off the building, the senior turned into a malicious spirit and began to wander around the teaching building in red. She tempted one person after another to jump off the building like dumplings falling into water. And the people who jumped off the building here all became food for the red-clothed senior after they died. The most exciting part of this story was, this red-clothed senior had a fountain pen that was placed on the table in the middle of the classroom. If someone could hold the fountain pen, they could use the method of inviting the pen spirit to invite her. Then she could fulfill that person's wish. The prerequisite was that the spirit had to be sent away. If she didn't send it away, the red-clothed senior would start killing people. And this group of brainless people didn't send the spirit away after inviting it. In the end, one after another, they were all unlucky. They were either hit by a vase, beaten up, or in a car accident. The scariest thing was that someone would call them every night. In the end, one of the girls with weak mental strength, called Xiao Nian, was called into the teaching building. She jumped off the building. Only then did the remaining 6 people realize the seriousness of the matter. They immediately paid to invite a ghost catcher. However, a group of freshmen who had never seen the world did not have any connections to invite a powerful ghost catcher. They also had people who watched the live broadcast and saw Wei Bai's live broadcast that had not been banned yet. They thought that she was very powerful. They pooled their money and invited her to exorcise the ghost. Then the original owner came. In other words, Wei Bai directly dropped into the ghost catcher scene. Wei Bai listened to the entire story. As expected, without a ghost story or a group of people who were trying their best to court death, it was impossible to continue. The 7 people in front of her were all experts at courting death. Wei Bai asked the system with a trembling voice, "There can't really be ghosts, right?" The system was as calm as the wind. "Don't be afraid. It's just a few small ghosts. What's there to be afraid of?" This sentence could be applied to any unafraid template. No, it was just a few small snakes. What was there to be afraid of? It was just a few hundred southern cockroaches. What was there to be afraid of? Don't be afraid. It's just a few rats. I'll fry them and eat them. But for those who were truly afraid, how could they not be afraid? She had experienced a ghostly plane in the past, and she was scared witless. Why was there another one? Wei Bai's face was pale, even paler than Yu Moqian's. The corner of the young man's mouth curled up. He was as calm as the system. A classmate beside him asked, "Heavenly Master, can we ask the pen spirit to leave?" Wei Bai said in a trembling voice, "Go, go, go. Go, pen spirit." Who the hell knows how to ask him to leave? She wasn't the one who invited him. Furthermore, the original owner of this body was also someone who was just waiting to die. He didn't even know how to send the pen spirit away. He was just putting on an act to deceive people. But why does this brush keep spinning in circles? Wei Wei Bai decided to let go. She let go of her hand, and the girl opposite her also let go of her hand in fear. Then the pen was still spinning, because the young man was still holding onto the fountain pen. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but say to him, "Let go, let's go." Rent was nothing. She could go out and set up a stall to count marriage. She could eat and drink for free. Why catch ghosts for no reason? The young man's fingers paused and the pen stopped. He turned to look at her. There was a strange concentration in his misty eyes. The girl who let go of her hand looked at Wei Wei Bai in fear. "Heavenly Master, who are you talking to?" The rest of the students were even more frightened. Everyone was afraid to begin with. Now that they saw Wei Wei Bai like this, they were even more afraid. Wei Wei Bai was stunned. She didn't wait for an answer. Suddenly, an ethereal, strange, and cold woman's laughter came from nowhere. This laughter completely frightened the group of new students. They screamed and immediately turned to run. 6 ran away. Wei Wei Bai came back to her senses. There were 7 people who invited the pen spirit. 7 people weren't wrong. 6 people ran over just now. Only her target was left, Yumo Qin. No, a new student named Xiao Nian died. There were indeed 6 people left alive. Then, who was this beautiful and cute young man in front of her? Wei Wei Bai's neck creaked. She felt that her bones were stiff. She was tongue-tied. "Didn't you say it was a senior in red?" The system said, "There's not only one ghost in this building." Wei Wei Bai was speechless. The young man in front of her picked up the fountain pen. His fingers were so white that they were almost transparent. They were as beautiful as jade. Then, as if he was testing, his fingertips lightly touched her fingers. An unusually cold temperature made Wei Wei Bai shiver. The young man's flawless face under the moonlight slowly revealed a smile so beautiful that it was almost illusory. "You can touch me?" Wei Wei Bai slowly retracted her hand. Her fingers were frozen. Then she slowly stood up and stared at Yumo Qin as if she was staring at a venomous snake. After Wei Wei Bai took a few steps back, she quickly turned around and ran as fast as she could. The strategy master was invincible. The strategy master was a coward. Wei Wei Bai said that she would try again in the morning when she had the courage, but she would forget about it now. The young man also stood up with the fountain pen in his hand. His red lips slowly curved into a strange smile. Then he floated out and followed Wei Wei Bai. // Download the at https://sashu.com button at the bottom to record this chapter. You will see it the next time you open the bookshelf. Chapter 1661. Wei Wei Bai ran out of the classroom. There was a dark corridor outside the door, and there were piles of junk everywhere. The dirty glass window made a harsh squeaking sound in the cold wind. The 6 troublemakers just now ran away quickly, and she didn't know where they went. Wei Wei Bai didn't care about others. She saw the stairs, and the words "5th floor" were painted in red. In the dark, the red paint was shocking. Wei Wei Bai was most afraid of the dark. She saw the dark staircase, and her legs went weak. Tongzi, sing Little Apple. The system didn't tease her, and it played the cheerful Little Apple. In the cheerful sound of the Little Apple, there was a girl's bitter laughter, sometimes far, sometimes close. Wei Wei Bai felt that compared to the cheerful music, this building was even scarier. Her teeth were chattering. "How many ghosts are there in this staircase?" The system said, "Not many, just a few little ghosts. The more powerful one is the senior in red, and the rest are your targets." Wei Wei Bai asked, "Who killed Xiao Nian?" The system said, "The senior in red." Wei Wei Bai asked, "How did Yumo Qin die?" The system flipped through the information. Family fight. He was the successor of the natural law school, and was killed by his cousin. He was suppressed under this building. The system saw that it wasn't lagging anymore, and it directly transmitted the information. Wei Wei Bai thought about Yumo Qin's background. Yumo Qin was actually from the Republic of China, and ghosts ran rampant in that time. The people who inherited the skills were divided into the Imperial Path School and the Natural Law School. The Imperial Path sect did all the dirty work. For example, they did the Taoist dance to calculate marriage, and they set up street stalls to eat and drink. Although they had the peachwood sword that was rewarded by their ancestors, and some skills to set up the array to catch ghosts. But compared to the Natural Law School's superior feng shui, divination, and ghost-catching skills, they were still too far behind. The Natural Law School was in charge of serving the upper class. From the Republic of China until now, it had become an exceptionally large force. However, the Imperial Path sect was still making a living. They didn't starve to death, and they didn't become rich. Otherwise, there wouldn't be such an unreliable direct descendant like Wei Bai. Wei Bai walked down the stairs while reading the information. That's not right. Yu Moqian is from the Republic of China. Why did you say that he's a freshman? The system said, a freshman from the Republic of China. Wei Bai. When he saw those students wearing university sports uniforms, he didn't think too much about it. Yu Moqian's uniform was the same as theirs. Therefore, she thought that Yu Moqian was a new ghost that had appeared in recent years. In the end, it turned out to be a super old ghost. Wei Bai continued reading. At that time, the Heavenly Tao sect was at its peak. When Yu Moqian was born, the yin-yang eye opened. His talent was astonishing. What followed was Yu Tianlai's life. The aura of extreme yang, the body of a virgin, ghosts would be afraid of him. At the age of 7, he was slated to be the future successor of the Heavenly Tao sect. Just as Yu Moqian's life was smooth, he caught ghosts all the way until he was 18 years old. The founder of the Heavenly Tao sect wanted to get something with great luck. He led the elites of the sect to fight. In the end, he didn't return. The people of the Heavenly Tao sect were in a panic. Yu Moqian, his cousin, and the others ran to save people. In the end, they found that the founder had died in a pile of ghosts. The thing with great luck nourished the entire ancient graveyard. This graveyard was filled with ghosts from ancient wars. Their combat power was off the charts, and the thing with great luck had spirituality. Chapter 1662. The people of the Natural Law School were devoured by the ghosts and were powerless to resist. In the end, to survive, the cousin came up with a crazy suppression formation. The formation needed a formation eye. It needed an item of extreme yang. Where could they find an item of extreme yang? Everyone immediately thought of the successor of the Natural Law School, Yu Moqian. He himself was an item of extreme yang. What followed was the old-fashioned story of fellow disciples killing each other. The cousin was jealous of Yu Moqian's chance of becoming the successor, so he took advantage of this opportunity. He trapped Yu Moqian in the center of the ghosts and set up a suppression formation. Those vengeful spirits were unable to escape and were trapped in this formation for eternity. The cousin escaped with the rest of the people. Relying on the ancestors' things, he became the leader himself and maintained the glory of the Natural Law School. As for Yu Moqian, he would forever remain in the land of vengeful spirits. Wei Bai pointed at the stairs under her feet with trembling fingers. Is this the graveyard that was filled with ghosts back then? The system said, yes. Wei Bai said, Yu Moqian's body is under the teaching building? As time passed, no one remembered this incident. The graveyard also became a teaching building. The system flipped through the information and said, it's fine. He's probably turned into bones. Wei Bai felt that the situation was more serious. There must be so many ghosts in this building that it was scary. Suddenly, Wei Bai stopped in her tracks. She had been going down the stairs for a long time, but the 5th floor above the stairwell was already covered in blood and stuck to the stairwell. Did she encounter a ghost wall? Wei Bai couldn't help but look down through the handrail of the stairs. She saw that the stairs kept going down without an end. There were countless of them. The 5th floor. She encountered a ghost wall. Wei Bai touched herself with trembling fingers, found a piece of chocolate, and put it back. She touched her left pocket and found a small peachwood sword. It felt like a phone pendant. There were also a few yellow talismans. What the hell was that drawing? It was even crazier than a doctor's prescription. Then he took out a bronze mirror from his pocket. It was probably the demon-revealing mirror. The system flipped through the information and said, the peachwood sword was purchased from Taobao for $9.09, and the yellow talisman was purchased from Taobao for $3 a dozen. Only the bronze mirror was obtained from the Emperor's Gate. Wei Wei Bai's fingers trembled as she looked at the bronze mirror. What's the use of it? Can it fight ghosts? If he was trapped here forever, Bai Weiwei probably wouldn't be able to hold on until dawn. There wasn't even a light switch. Her hands were sweating profusely. The dark environment made her extremely nervous. Fortunately, there was a system to chat with her to distract her. Otherwise, she wouldn't have gone down the stairs. The system said, you can't fight ghosts, but your side reward is here. Wei Wei Bai, what's the reward? The system said, the Chinese talisman in your hand is the reward. As long as you stick it on the evil spirit's face, you'll be able to stop it. Wei Wei Bai immediately took a look at the Chinese talisman in her hand. Only 3. The system said, it's very expensive. There's no discount. There was no discount at the supermarket. It was too expensive to be worth it. But there was no item to catch ghosts in the discount. It reluctantly took out a portion of its snack money to buy Chinese talismans for her, but it was rejected? Wei Wei Bai, the main system is so stingy. The rewards are getting more and more ridiculous. The stingy system didn't dare to say anything. It silently hugged the potato chips tightly. Wei Wei Bai was about to put away the bronze mirror and look for a way out. The bronze mirror seemed to vaguely show something. Chapter 1663. She couldn't help but take a closer look, but it was her own face. She looked quite cute, with a pair of round almond-shaped eyes, short hair that reached her ears, and a standard oval face. She didn't look like a devastatingly beautiful woman, but she was elegant and clean. Wei Wei Bai took a few more glances and suddenly, she saw something behind her in the mirror. She couldn't help but observe, and found a pair of red eyes. The system reminded her softly, there's a ghost behind you. Wei Wei Bai's hand trembled, and the figure behind her in the mirror became more obvious. Her neck was so stiff that it made a cracking sound. She finally mustered up the courage to look back. And there was indeed a ghost behind her. In the dilapidated staircase, long hair fell from the stairs, and the end of the hair was a woman's face. The face was only a dozen centimeters away from her. Wei Wei Bai's whole body turned cold, and the fingers that were holding the mirror started to tremble. The distance was too close. Wei Wei Bai saw the woman hanging upside down from the stairs. Her blood-red feet were straight up, and her head was pulled down by her hair, forming a strange posture with her neck crooked. Blood continued to drip from her feet, landing on her mangled face that was beyond recognition. Her empty eyes were white as she stared straight at Wei Wei Bai. Bai Weiwei's entire person was stunned. No matter how many times she had seen it, or how many big scenes she had experienced. When she saw these ghosts, she was still terrified, and her legs were still weak. She still couldn't control her fragile little heart from trembling. The female ghost suddenly opened her mouth slowly and laughed eerily. Are you the one who invited the pen spirit? This was the real pen spirit that was invited by the group of death-seeking experts. Senior in red. Wei Wei Bai felt as if she had been electrocuted, and the bronze mirror hit the female ghost's face hard, causing her face to become crooked. Then she jumped up, grabbed a handful of yellow talismans and ran downstairs. Ghost, Tongzi, there's a ghost. The system said, yeah, that female ghost's head was crooked and her neck was split in half. She reached out with her bloody hands and put her head back in place. Then she chased after us. She used her head to walk, thump, thump. Wei Wei Bai said, don't say it, it's even scarier. The system said, I'll show you the process of the ghost catching up, so you can run faster. Wei Wei Bai said, my legs are weak. I can't run fast. The system replied, there's nothing to be afraid of. There are no ghosts in this world. It's all your fault for not being strong enough. I'll play you a song to cheer you on. Then Wei Wei Bai heard it. The wind is howling, the horses are neighing, the yellow river is roaring, the yellow river is roaring. The system said, how is it? Listening to such a majestic song, you're not afraid anymore, right? Wei Wei Bai asked, Are there really no ghosts in this world? Is it all a psychological effect? The system was silent. Then it said faintly, I'm lying, silly child. If you don't believe me, look behind you. The senior in red is catching up. Wei Weibai did not dare to look. She ran down the stairs as fast as she could. As she ran down the stairs, hairs started to appear. The female ghost's voice became shrill. Did you invite the pen spirit? Did you invite the pen spirit? Wei Weibai turned around and yelled, No, don't chase me. I won't agree to be with you no matter how much you chase me. This type of ghost would definitely want to kill her. Then she would leave her in this building. That was how it went in the movies. However, when she turned around, she saw that face hanging in the middle of the stairs. It was less than 3 centimeters away from her. Chapter 1664. The female ghost kept running behind her, sticking close to her back. Wei Weibai's mind went blank. Only then did she remember her yellow talisman. Then, she took out a yellow talisman and was about to stick it on the female ghost's face. She didn't know where the scream came from. It gave Wei Weibai a fright. The yellow talisman actually stuck on the ghost's hair and didn't stick on the ghost's face. Her hair suddenly burned. A violent force appeared from the yellow talisman, burning with yellow flames. The female ghost screamed in agony. Blood started to flow from her 7 orifices on her pale face. Wei Weibai's legs trembled and she fell down the stairs. She hit the wall of the stairwell and her head was a little dizzy. Are you okay? A pleasant and deep voice sounded. Wei Weibai's lips trembled. I'm fine. After saying that, she looked up and seemed to see a pair of feet wearing black cloth shoes floating 5 centimeters above the ground. Then she looked up and saw Yu Maqian's handsome face. He was casually playing with a fountain pen with his fingers. He wasn't wearing the student sportswear anymore. He was back to his original appearance. He was wearing a navy blue man's gown with a beautiful nephrite jade pendant hanging on his waist. His long black hair was braided and fell behind his head. It followed his floating body and swayed from time to time. The corners of his mouth were slightly raised. His dark eyes had a kind of exquisite death aura. If his feet weren't off the ground, Wei Weibai would feel that this young man in front of her was good-looking and full of spiritual energy. It was as if he had walked out of a painting of the Republic of China. Wei Weibai tried to convince herself. This was the target. If she ran away now, she would have to come back in the future. So, Wei Weibai stretched out her trembling hand and gently grabbed his trousers. Then, she looked up, and there was a trace of sincere pleading in her watery eyes. Can you save me? The girl's voice was clear like spring water. It seemed out of place in this dirty place. The power of the yellow talisman was limited. After the female ghost's hair was burned, the flames disappeared. The corridor returned to darkness, and the faint moonlight shone through. The young man's expression was strangely frozen. His voice was gentle, with a kind of ticklish tone as he said, Oh, you want me to save you? The female ghost jumped down the stairs with a thud. The whites of her eyes were bloodshot, as if they were soaked in blood. She was provoked by Wei Weibai and was filled with resentment and anger. I want you to die, I want you to die. Wei Weibai was frightened and immediately reached out her hands to hug the pair of floating feet. Both of them were ghosts. He would choose someone with good looks to hug her thigh. Even if he died, he would die in the hands of a good-looking ghost. After Wei Weibai hugged his legs, she shivered. It was frighteningly cold. Yu Maqian, on the other hand, tilted his head in confusion when she pounced on him and hugged his legs. The female ghost's remaining hair was like a sharp thorn, piercing through the stair railings and directly piercing towards Wei Weibai's head. Wei Weibai watched in horror as the hair attacked her. She was so frightened that she immediately closed her eyes and hugged Yu Maqian's legs tightly, her face rubbing against his dark blue robes. Yu Maqian lowered his head to look at her. She was like a pitiful little animal, trembling in fear. His expression was calm as he reached out his fingertips to touch the coils of her hair. The female ghost's hair was already attacking him, but the young man calmly raised his hand and grabbed the hair. The female ghost's face showed intense pain. Chapter 1665. Yumotian slowly used his strength and tore off the long hair one by one. The female ghost screamed at the top of her lungs. Yumotian said indifferently, "Get lost." The female ghost immediately ignored her broken hair and used the remaining long hair to wrap around her body. She turned into black smoke and disappeared. After the female ghost disappeared, Yumotian continued his actions. His white, nearly transparent fingers touched by Weiwei's head. Her soft hair warmed up his cold fingers with the warmth of a human. He really could touch her. Yumotian looked at her strangely. Why could he touch her? He was an earthbound spirit. It was impossible for ghosts and humans to touch each other. Even if humans thought that ghosts could kill them. It was also a strong hypnosis. But he was very sure that she could touch him. It was not hypnosis, nor was it an illusion in a special formation. The real contact made the young man who had not seen anyone for 100 years show a trace of greed in his eyes. What a warm body! Her trembling skin pressed against his ice-cold body, causing him to tremble slightly as well. Weiwei said to the system with a trembling voice, "A ghost is touching my head. I'm going to be unlucky for 3 years." The system said, "You are indeed going to be unlucky for 3 years." After that, the system's notification sounded. This mission is to obtain the love of Yumotian. Target, Yumotian. Completion, 0. Time, 3 years. 3 years was too long, this strategy time. Of course, compared to a lifetime, 3 years was not unbearable. No, the target was a ghost. 3 minutes was unbearable. The system saw that she was so scared and immediately encouraged her. Don't you have a yellow talisman? If you are really scared, stick it on the face of a ghost and tie it up. Weiwei, it made sense. With a yellow talisman in hand, as long as she stuck it on the face, there was no need for her to be scared. She was a woman who was used to grand occasions. After brainwashing herself, Weiwei raises her stiff neck. No matter what, even if the target is a crab spirit, she still has a strategy. They couldn't discriminate against him just because he wasn't human. Weiwei had just raised her head when she saw Yumotian's face right in front of her. The youth's skin was too pale, so pale that it was fragile. There was no light in his black eyes. They were as dark as the deepest night. Even Weiwei's face couldn't be reflected in such dark eyes. The shape of those eyes was very beautiful, but it was too dark. Weiwei was scared again. She pursed her lips and was just about to show off her ability to speak human language when she saw a ghost. "Big uncle, thank you, you saved me," the system asked. "Is your tape jammed?" Yumotian was not the slightest bit impatient. Seeing her like this, he gently curved his lips. Then he lowered his head and his cold lips covered her trembling lips. Weiwei, ding, the male lead's favorability has increased by 5. Weiwei swore that this was the fastest strategy target to increase favorability in history. And she didn't do anything. She only felt that her lips were covered by a piece of ice. It was so cold that it hurt. She didn't dare to move away, so she could only let him kiss her gently. It wasn't gentle, but it was very slow and strange. It was like the feeling of a poisonous snake slipping across her skin. As the favorability increased, Weiwei's heart flashed with all kinds of guesses, but she had a certain feeling. It was not the favorability of love. It had nothing to do with friendship or family. This kind of increase in favorability made her vigilant. Yumotian was a little reluctant to part with the warmth of her lips. He slowly left. There was no sign of breathing between his nose and mouth, and there was no breath. A joyful smile appeared on his cold and pale face. As expected, it's a pure yang body. He looked the same as he did 100 years ago. Yin-yang eyes, pure yang body. It was almost a perfect match for him. They had finally met. Yumotian's smile became even more gentle, but she didn't know why it gave people a strange feeling of hypocrisy. He reached out his beautiful fingers and held her confused and scared face. He said in a low voice, "Don't be afraid, I'll protect you." Weiwei, one who is unaccountably solicitous, is hiding evil intentions. She couldn't feel at ease with any kind of strange increase in favorability. Her lips trembled as she revealed a smile. "You really are a good ghost. I'll burn money for you when I get out." Yumo-chin shook his head. His smile was like a strange mask. I want you to be my bride. Is at https://www. Sashu.com// comma. Chapter 1666. The wind blew, the dark and empty staircase and the bloody painting of the 5th floor were painted on the wall. The atmosphere was very quiet. His pale fingers were placed on her shoulder, cold to the bone. Wei Bai shrank into a corner, feeling like a weak and pitiful little thing. She was always the one forcing others to marry. She had just transmigrated and had not done any strategy. Yet she was forced to marry by a ghost. Wei Bai's mind was filled with a conspiracy, a very big conspiracy. It did not make sense for someone to marry a ghost. Moreover, the 5 points of affinity proved that Yumo-chin was just a little bit interested in her. The fragile affinity was on the verge of collapse. This made Wei Bai even more vigilant. Wei also specifically asked the system, is the goal of this strategy to pull someone in as a stand-in? The system said, yes, you have a pure yang body in this world and you have yin-yang eyes. Of course, it was accidentally mutated when you transmigrated, the original owner did not. Wei Bai said, he wants to possess my body? The system said, let me look through the information. Wei Bai said, it must be. I have the same body as him, so he wants to become a human, so he wants to kill me and possess my body. This strategy target is too hardcore. Her body was female. He was not afraid of the monthly menstruation tormenting him to death. The system said, I found the information, but it is not as scary as you said. Isn't Yumo-chin's body still suppressed below? Wei Bai stared at the young man in front of her and asked distractedly, then what? Has he turned into bones? The system said, no, it seems that his body has not transformed for thousands of years because of the formation. Wei Bai said, then he is an old zombie. The system said, he still retains his vitality, as long as there is a pure yang object similar to him to suppress this place, then he can revive and run away. Wei Bai was speechless. This reason was even scarier. He was not happy to be suppressed in this place filled with ghosts. It was one thing for him to find a substitute, but he was actually planning to turn her into an object of suppression. She thought about how she would spend time with a bunch of vengeful spirits in the future. Wei Bai expressed that she couldn't wait to die immediately and give up on the strategy. Yumo-chin's smile was still as strange as ever. He sat cross-legged, about 10 centimeters above the ground. There are many benefits to marrying me. Isn't that good? Although he was speaking the truth, his eyes were terrifyingly dark. It was as if he would start a massacre if she said no. Under his threatening gaze, Wei Bai stiffened for a moment before she slowly nodded. Okay, ghost. After saying that, a yellow talisman was fiercely stuck to his face. Ruthless, accurate, and fast, there was absolutely no mistake. Suppress your ass. You actually dared to set your sights on her. Yumo-chin was stunned. He floated in the air, his eyes wide open. He looked unusually cute and adorable. Wei Bai immediately jumped up and ran. Tongzi, what do I do with this ghost wall? The system said, this is a psychological effect. You just have to think that the next floor is the 4th floor. Wei Bai said, 4th floor, 4th floor, 4th floor. As she muttered, the number of words on the staircase suddenly changed to the 4th floor. Wei Bai immediately ran to the 3rd floor, muttering, 3rd floor, 3rd floor. When she finally saw the door, she hurriedly opened it, only to find that the door was locked. Wei Bai felt nervous. Usually, after the door was locked, ghosts would also come. Suddenly she heard a dong, dong sound. Wei Bai looked back with difficulty and saw a pair of blood-red eyes staring at her from the stairs. The full articles, the downloads, the S to facilitate your next reading. You can click Save at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 1667. It was the senior in red who was standing upside down and walking with her head. She was staring at her. Wei Bai's mouth was dry. She could not breathe properly and her heart was beating too fast. She did not die suddenly because her body was strong. The red-clothed senior sister cracked open her black mouth and began to laugh eerily. Her head bounced up in a strange position, and then she fell down one stair after another with a thud. Wei Wei Bai said, "Tongzi, give me a Ru-Yi door and send me to the temple." She wanted nothing more than to hug a Buddha statue and tremble. The system said, "Ru-Yi door is very expensive." She could not afford it. The system said, "Why don't you use a yellow talisman? There's still one left." Wei Wei Bai held the only yellow talisman in her hand. Her hands were trembling like crazy. The senior in red had already arrived in front of her. Wei Wei Bai was scared out of her wits. She calmed down and stuck the yellow talisman on the female ghost's face. The female ghost's long hair was about to pierce through her chest. However, an unknown source of energy caused her body to suddenly stiffen. Before the yellow talisman came, she could not move at all. The yellow talisman stuck to the senior in red who had turned into a statue. Wei Wei Bai saw that the ghost would not move. She sighed in relief. Then she slowly reached for the door. She thought that the door would not open. It actually opened. Wei Wei Bai immediately opened the door and stepped out. The system said, "Wait." Wei Wei Bai was speechless. Then she saw the lonely moon outside the door. The dark treetops let out the sharp sound of the cold wind. Under the moonlight, Yu Moqian had a yellow talisman stuck on his forehead. A pair of black eyes stared at her. The system finished its sentence. "The male lead is outside." Wei Wei Bai said, "What happened to sticking the yellow talisman and not moving?" The system was speechless. The opponent's level was too high. The yellow talisman was ineffective. Yu Moqian's handsome face suddenly turned ashen, and his voice was extremely cold. "You're going to marry me?" Wei Wei Bai's back was drenched in cold sweat, but her legs did not go soft. Sure enough, after being scared by the same thing for so long, he had become numb to it. Being numb was also a form of bravery. Surprisingly, Wei Wei Bai was still able to remain calm and collected. She didn't even tremble as she revealed a stiff smile. Yu Moqian slowly floated in front of her. He tried to blow the yellow talisman, but he realized that he couldn't breathe and couldn't blow it away. He chuckled, seemingly amused. Then he reached out with his fingertips and removed the yellow talisman from his forehead. "A very good talisman. Did you draw it?" Yu Moqian glanced at the yellow talisman and asked curiously. Wei Wei Bai stood up straight, almost using all her strength to answer slowly, "No, it's what the ancestor left for me." She couldn't say that she bought it on Taobao and got it from the system. Yu Moqian calmly blew the yellow talisman. This time, the yellow talisman was no longer calm. Instead, it suddenly burned with a green will-the-wisp. The yellow talisman burned. Yu Moqian saw that Wei Wei Bai was staring at the ashes of the yellow talisman. He reached out his finger, and a fountain pen appeared on it. The fountain pen drew black lines in the air, and the lines turned into a lifelike piece of paper. The lines on the paper turned back into the yellow talisman. Then, the originally drawn yellow talisman suddenly turned into a real yellow talisman paper. It was exactly the same as the one bought by the system. Yu Moqian passed the talisman paper to her and said kindly, "Since it was given by the ancestor, it's a pity to destroy it. I'll draw a few more for you." Chapter 1668. Wei Wei Bai's fingers were stiff, and there was only one thought in her mind. Strategy, 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 not to mention that it was a ghost. Even if it was a dung beetle, she couldn't be picky. Wei Wei Bai finally hypnotized herself. She stretched out her hand and took the yellow talisman from his hand. The yellow talisman was extremely cold, just like the temperature of his body. Wei Wei Bai's fingers were trembling, but her voice finally stopped trembling. She touched her pocket and took out the half-melted chocolate. Then she carefully handed it to him. "Do you want to eat some?" Yu Moqian looked at the chocolate in her hand quietly. The smile on his face slowly disappeared. He looked at her strangely. It was as if he was examining something that he was very interested in. Wei Wei Bai's fingers were about to stiffen, but he didn't take it. Could it be that he felt that it was too long? Just as Wei Wei Bai was about to take back the chocolate, a pale finger pressed down on the chocolate. Then he slowly pinched the chocolate with his fingertips. Wei Wei Bai's palms were sweaty. She said cautiously, "It's very delicious." Yuma Qin smiled. Suddenly he pinched her palm with his fingernails. A red nail mark appeared on her soft palm. Wei Wei Bai took a deep breath and took a few steps back. She looked at him with some fear. Yuma Qin said, "This is not a good place. Don't come here next time." After saying that, he drew in the air with the pen in his hand. A ray of light was drawn. No, the darkness was drawn by the fountain pen. Sunlight appeared in the sky. It was already morning, but this place was covered by the yin qi of vengeful spirits. People who entered this place couldn't wait until morning, and there would never be morning. This little celestial master in front of him was stupid and useless. It was obvious that she was taught by those unreliable idiots in the Imperial Tao sect. She was actually afraid of ghosts. "Let's go." Wei Wei Bai looked at him in a daze, as if she didn't understand his actions. Yuma Qin smiled. He couldn't help but float in front of her. He stretched out his finger and lightly flicked her delicate ear. "I'm not going. I really want you to be my bride. I'll let you stay here forever." His voice lingered in the air, like the sound of spring water hitting rocks. Even his dark eyes didn't look so eerie anymore. Wei Wei Bai hurriedly covered her ears. She glared at him, then turned around and ran without saying a word. As she disappeared from the teaching building, the night once again covered the teaching building. A shrill and mournful laugh sounded from all directions. You. Yuma Qin acted as if he hadn't heard her and gently peeled the chocolate. The temperature on the chocolate was her temperature. There was an aura as scorching as the sun. You. Also, if he was trapped here, he might only meet that little celestial master for the rest of his life, let alone for the rest of his life. It's not too late to get her back. Go, Yuma Qin. Replace her with you. Go. The voice was getting more and more shrill and crazy. Countless souls squeezed out of the windows of the school building. They were densely packed and wriggling, trying to squeeze out. Yuma Qin remained indifferent, his delicate face calm as a pine tree. He took a bite of the chocolate and sighed softly. "I know how lucky it is to meet a scapegoat, but I'm soft-hearted. Seeing her is like seeing myself. If I leave her here, she'll be scared to death." She was obviously a celestial master from the Imperial Tao sect. She was afraid of ghosts. Chapter 1669. When he saw that she was afraid of ghosts, he laughed so hard that he couldn't stand up straight. He had never seen a Taoist who was so afraid of ghosts. Moreover, the yang energy in her body could restrain ghosts. If he hadn't mistakenly entered this place, he wouldn't have encountered ghosts on a normal day. To catch ghosts back then, he had put in dozens of times more effort than others. It wasn't that he was stupid, but that he couldn't see ghosts at all. A person with a pure yang body was like a light bulb walking in the dark. Ghosts would run away when they saw them. Where could they catch them? "You are so stupid. Do you want to stay here forever?" Those ghost heads roared. Their voices, neither male nor female, came from all directions. "Impossibly foolish, Yuma Qin, impossibly foolish." Yuma Qin licked his fingers and finished the last bite of chocolate. There was no taste. He was a spirit body. Even if he could get what she gave him, he couldn't taste anything. But surprisingly, he felt that it was sweet. He was indeed soft-hearted and stupid. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been suppressed here back then. After Yuma Qin sighed hypocritically, he suddenly raised his hand. The fountain pen in his hand smoothly drew in the air, and a peachwood sword appeared. A red tassel fell on the hilt of the sword. Golden light flowed out of the peachwood sword, and an astonishing light appeared from the tip of the sword. Those ghosts roared in fear. Their dense heads retreated in fear, not daring to run out of the building. Yuma Qian's expression became indifferent and solemn. "After so many years, you can't do anything to me, and I can't kill all of you. We've been killing each other for so long. I'm tired and annoyed. If you provoke me again, I'll take you down with me even if I burn my soul." After so many years, he didn't perish together with this group of vengeful spirits. It was just so that one day he could go out and seek justice. Unfortunately, he let go of his last hope just now. He suddenly felt tired. How could he not know the purpose of this group of vengeful spirits? He found a scapegoat and left himself. But that scapegoat, such as the little celestial master just now, definitely couldn't suppress such a large group of vengeful spirits. Once he left, the ghosts here would leave as well. No matter how much he wanted to seek justice for himself, Yumochian couldn't bring himself to let this group of evil spirits run amok in the human world. The wraiths slowly quieted down. The teaching building became empty and dark again. The peachwood sword in Yumochian's hand turned back into lines and dissipated. He sat cross-legged in the air with his hands supporting his chin. His dark eyes were half closed. How boring! He was so bored that whenever he saw someone he rarely saw, he would run over to scare her like a half-grown child. Yumochian pursed his lips and sighed. Don't ever come back. Otherwise, I won't be able to control myself and will want you to be my scapegoat. 100 years of loneliness was too unbearable. Just now, he couldn't resist the evil desire in his heart. He really wanted her to become his substitute. So, don't ever reply. That. Suddenly, a girl's trembling voice came from behind. Her voice was surprisingly pleasant to the ears. Do you want to come with me? She was obviously very scared, but she didn't hesitate in the slightest. Yumochian's body stiffened. He couldn't believe that someone would be so stupid as to think that what she heard was an illusion. But in the next second, a timid hand with a warm temperature held his cold and lifeless fingers. Yumochian's fingers were completely warm. Yang energy climbed up his cold and decadent blood vessels and reached his stilled heart. Chapter 1670. A wave of scorching yang qi started to burn. He finally turned around and saw Wei Wei Bai's beautiful face appear. Wei Wei Bai had difficulty breathing. Her self-brainwashing effect had finally taken effect, and she was not so scared anymore. It's not good here, I'll take you away. She actually did not want to come back. But she had just taken 2 steps when a side mission appeared. Ding, dear darling host, please take the male lead to complete the mission of catching 100 ghosts. Mission point, do not leave the male lead within 1 meter of you. Side mission punishment, electric shock. Bai Weiwei thought it was some 9th heaven Xian Lei that would strike her to death. In the end, it was just a simple electric shock. The punishment was so light that it was unreal. When she took 2 steps, she knew why it was just an electric shock. Because the electric shock was real-time, when she was 1 meter away from Yumochian, the electric shock passed through her body. Wei Wei Bai walked 3 steps firmly and was almost electrocuted to death. She could only come back. Yumochian's pale and calm face finally showed a trace of demonic fog in his black eyes. He laughed softly. You're really interesting. She was obviously scared to death, but she still dared to come back. Unfortunately, he could not leave this place. He slowly leaned close to her ear and said, Since you're back, why don't you stay here with me? Too lonely, really too lonely. It was good to have one more person to accompany him. His fingernails turned black and had already reached her neck. If he pierced it, she would not be able to get out. Wei Wei Bai grabbed his hand tightly. Her almond eyes were as round as a cat's, but there was no reflection of him. Because he was illusory. He could not be seen, touched, and could not appear in any mirror. The eyes were just one of the mirrors. This little celestial master had a pair of crystal-clear eyes. They did not have any filth or turbidity. It was a rare good mirror. No wonder she could see ghosts. She was born with yin-yang eyes, the same talent as him. Yumochian also cherished talent. When he saw such a good seedling, he couldn't help but feel pity for him as if he was looking at a seedling. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 7. Wei Wei Bai. His favorability towards her is rising so fast. Is he trying to take her to death? After all, he still wanted her to be his scapegoat. Yumochian chuckled softly like an innocent youth. Seeing that she was so scared, he didn't harden his heart to keep her. He threatened, If you don't leave, you'll really marry me. Wei Wei Bai was speechless for a moment, but she still said firmly and shamelessly, If I want to marry you, you have to propose first. Come with me. Yumochian felt that she was really interesting. Anyway, he had nothing to do. He nodded lightly. As long as you can take me out, I will propose marriage. The people of the natural law school proposed to the people of the Imperial Path sect. He would be laughed at to death. But Yu Maqian acted like he didn't understand this and was a bit willful. Wei Wei Bai immediately turned around, held his cold hand, and rushed out of that bright place. She said to the system, Tongzi, can we really go out? Yu Maqian didn't look like he could go out. The system said, his body is suppressing here, so his soul can't go out. But your body's yang qi can help him escape. As long as Wei Wei Bai held Yu Maqian's hand tightly and gave him some yang qi from time to time, the human world could hold Yu Maqian. Of course, she could also pull Yu Maqian out of this place. But if the body didn't have a scapegoat, it couldn't go out. Wei Wei Bai nodded. She understood. As long as she gave Yu Maqian enough yang qi, right? Her body was like a small sun now, but how could she give Yu Maqian yang qi? The important thing was that they escaped from the school building. Wei Wei Bai turned around and shouted, sorry for being rude. After shouting, she kissed Yu Maqian's lips fiercely. Like artificial respiration, she passed her breath to him. Yu Maqian's cold body was warmed by her breath. Before he could react, the hustle and bustle of the human world hit him in the face. He looked up blankly and saw the busy crowd, the cars coming and going, and the hot sun. He went out. Chapter 1671. Wei Wei Bai left his lips and realized that they were standing on the street. The dilapidated school building was not far away. It looked like an ordinary, run-down building with no signs of life. Wei Wei Bai held his hand tightly and said softly, follow me closely. There are many roads here. You will get lost. Yu Maqian felt the heat of the sun. He also felt the vitality in her body. The streets after 100 years were different from before. There were more people. However, there were more ghosts and monsters. People's desires were rampant, and there was a foul atmosphere everywhere. Yu Maqian glanced at the people who passed by him. Many of them were surrounded by black energy. These were the people who would be unlucky in the near future. They were also the people that ghosts liked to haunt. The purer a person's soul was, the more ghosts would haunt them. Bai Weiwei's physique was special, and her yang qi was boiling, unless it was in a special place. Otherwise, it would not be easy to see ghosts. He floated and followed her forward. Wei Wei Bai suddenly thought of something. She rushed to a shop and bought a black umbrella. Then, she shielded him from the sun. Yu Maqian looked at the black umbrella. He then saw Wei Wei Bai's pure almond eyes staring at him. She was so afraid of him at first. Now, she was slowly getting used to it. He smiled. You brought me out. I will fulfill my promise and bring you to propose marriage. Wei Wei Bai, propose marriage, get married, become Yu Maqian's substitute, be suppressed in his place, get along with a bunch of ghosts, ha. She refused. Of course, she could not reject him directly. She could only test him. People nowadays have to fall in love first. When they are familiar with each other and feel that the time is right, they can propose marriage. Yu Maqian was teasing her. After all, humans and ghosts were different. Even if he was once a ghost catcher, he was now nothing more than an ominous ghost wandering the world. If he really went to the Imperial Path sect to propose marriage, it was not certain if the Imperial Path sect could destroy him. However, the little celestial master would definitely be punished. He extended his hand and touched the handle of the umbrella. A wave of warmth appeared from his fingertips. It was the yang energy coming from her hand that was holding the umbrella. He was finally certain that the yang qi on her body had concealed the ghost qi on his body. Thus, he managed to hide it from the netherworld and bring it into the mortal realm. This kind of belt was really similar to a human belt. Because as long as there was still yang qi left in the things that she had touched, he would be able to touch them. Therefore, as long as he was by her side, he would be able to escape from the place that was suppressing him and wander around. Yu Maqian lowered his head to look at her. Under his messy bangs, a hint of a smile appeared in his dark eyes. It was rare to find someone with the same physique as him. His talent was even purer than his. He suddenly whispered, "There's a ghost." Wei Wei Bai was shocked and looked around in fear. Where? How could a ghost wander around so arrogantly in broad daylight? Yumo-chin used his almost transparent fingertip to tap the back of her hand. Then, he pointed to a tall building in front of them. Wei Wei Bai followed his actions and looked up. She realized that there was a radio and television station building in front of them. At the highest point of the building, on the dangerous edge of the balcony, a white figure stood upright. Wei Wei Bai was not nearsighted, so she could clearly see that the figure was standing on top of the building. Her long hair covered her entire face. She was wearing a white dress that was stained with blood. Suddenly, she seemed to have noticed Wei Wei Bai's gaze. A cold wind blew past, and the black hair on her face fluttered. A pair of venomous eyes stared at Wei Wei Bai. By Wei Wei. At the crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www. Sashu. Download Transmigration system, Adonis. Come here and read this on your phone. https://m. Sashu. Below to record this reading. The comma. Chapter 1672. Then she trembled and pressed the umbrella down, blocking the female ghost's line of sight. Is there a ghost? What? I didn't see anything. Wei Wei Bai stiffened her neck and refused to admit it. She heard that once she admitted to seeing a ghost, the ghost would follow her. She really couldn't suppress the fear that came from the bottom of her heart. This fear came from the shadow of her childhood. It was almost an insurmountable psychological barrier. Yumo-chin showed a mischievous smile. She really was afraid of ghosts. It was such a contradiction and cute contrast. It was rare for Yumo-chin to leave the place of suppression, so when he saw Wei Wei Bai, he even found her pleasing to the eye. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 10. Wei Wei Bai, the favorability came too fast, it was like a tornado, she couldn't handle it. She hadn't gone through the process of making a scene, quarreling, making up, or killing each other. How did the favorability increase? Wei Wei Bai, who had always had a rough journey, was not used to the speed of the favorability increase. Wei Wei Bai said, Tongzi, I feel like there's a conspiracy. The favorability was too smooth, it made her feel unsure. The system said, you're cute and the ghosts like you, the favorability increased, don't worry too much. The host was used to being abused, sometimes when she came to a smoother world. Unexpectedly, they were all worried and frightened. In this world, other than the more tiring side missions, the system found that the emotional fragments in this world were very gentle. So it was normal for the favorability to increase. But because the host was abused by the perverted male lead too many times, the system had no way to comfort her. Seeing the system so calm, Wei Wei Bai could only suppress the urge to stir up trouble in her heart. Other than the fact that this world was full of ghosts, it seemed to be quite smooth. Full of ghosts, Wei Wei Bai grabbed the umbrella and said to Yumo-chin, let's go. Yumo-chin smiled gently, then looked at the female ghost in white on the tall building. The female ghost seemed to want to come down and follow them. Yumo-chin calmly looked at the white-clothed female ghost. A murderous intent appeared in his dead eyes. This is a warning. Wei Wei Bai was targeted by a female ghost. She planned to come and pester her. The white-robed female ghost was taken aback, and an intense fear appeared on her face. She immediately crouched down and trembled, not daring to follow. Yumo-chin knew that it was his existence. Wei Wei Bai's pure yang body was being suppressed. Therefore, those ghosts started to target Wei Wei Bai. He was now a ghost with heavy yin energy. Being by her side was depriving her of her yang energy. Her existence, which was originally like a small sun, had become dim. But because of the existence of the yin-yang eye. Now, compared to ordinary people, she was more likely to attract ghosts. Malicious ghosts were filled with all kinds of grievances, resentment, and obsessions formed by the deaths of wronged people. Once they realized that someone could see them, they would come over and try to get that person to avenge them. If their wishes were not fulfilled, they would start killing people. That was why these ghosts were really troublesome. Yumo-chin looked at Wei Wei Bai, who was holding the umbrella with some difficulty. Her gaze was straight ahead. A few strands of her neat short hair fell to the side of her cheeks. There was a faint blush on her fair skin. It was a healthy color that only living creatures had. Yumo-chin touched his face. It was cold and pale. He glanced at the little celestial master who was seriously blocking the sun for him. He tilted his head and thought seriously for a moment. Suddenly, he gently tried to step on the ground. Chapter 1673. The ground sizzled as the scorching heat burned a hole in his shoes. Yumo-chin helplessly supported his chin with his hand. It seemed that he could only float. The ground was too hot in the day. He could only trouble the little celestial master to continue raising her hand to shield him from the sun. Wei Bai brought Yumo-chin back to her rented apartment. And then, bang bang bang. This was the sound of her suitcase, stool, and other things being thrown out by the landlord. Yes, she was 3 months behind on her rent. Wei Bai had officially become one of the homeless people sleeping on the streets. And one of them was Yumo-chin. Wei Bai awkwardly carried her suitcase. Why don't we go to a hotel first? Wei Bai then checked her balance. Her balance was pitifully low. Wei Bai looked at her pitiful balance and thought that she had to survive the night. She asked the system, "Where's the cheapest hotel nearby?" The system looked at the map and sent her a name. Wei Bai immediately pulled Yumo-chin over excitedly. The hotel was actually not very remote. However, there was a commercial plaza nearby, and this area was being demolished. But for some reason, halfway through the demolition, the developers all ran away. This hotel was also struggling to survive in this dilapidated neighborhood that was half demolished. When Wei Bai pulled Yumo-chin over, she felt that the whole place was gloomy. Moreover, this demolition site was facing the broadcasting building. She did not know if that female ghost was still there. The original owner of this body had some common sense about taboos. For example, one should not look directly at a ghost. Therefore, one should not open their inner eyes easily. Ghost hunters without yin-yang eyes would use special methods to open their inner eyes. Wei Bai, who had yin-yang eyes, did not need to do so. Therefore, she had to be more careful. Because if she looked directly at a ghost, the ghost would come over. Most specters had obsessions, and they would try their best to pester the humans who saw them to help them complete their obsessions. If he couldn't complete it, he would drag the others down with him. What was even scarier was a ghost that looked for a scapegoat. Most malicious ghosts could only wander around the place where they died, and some ghosts would even repeat the scene of their death over and over again. To escape this terrible torture, Ghost would pull someone over to be his substitute so that he could escape. Just like her relationship with Yumo-chin. She was the best scapegoat for Yumo-chin. After going through all kinds of taboos in her mind, Wei Bai didn't dare to raise her head. She was afraid that she would see some ghost hanging in the air and looking at her. The old man smoked a cigarette and casually gave Wei Bai a key. The old man looked at her from head to toe. "Little girl, don't open the door after midnight, no matter what you hear." After that, the old man took the money and let her in. Wei Bai, if he had said that from the start, she would definitely not have been able to control herself. Yumo-chin looked around curiously. He had been trapped in that building all this time. Although there were occasionally people who accidentally barged in, he could play with them. He could also see a lot of things about modern society through the eyes of those people. For example, the group of students that Wei Bai had brought. He even tried to conjure up their university sportswear and blend in with them to scare them. It was just for fun. If he didn't find fun like this, these 100 years of loneliness could drive a ghost crazy. Of those new students, except for Xiao Nian, who courted death, he had casually sent the rest of the new students away. Yumo-chin wasn't a good person, but he still had a sense of responsibility as a ghost hunter. Chapter 1674. So if he could save her, he would. If he couldn't, it was fine too. Coming out with Wei Bai was even more surprising. The image that he saw was indeed different from the impression that was left in the eyes of others. Wei opened the door to the room. It was a standard single bedroom. The white sheets and pillows looked quite clean. The bathroom had frosted glass. Wei Bai suddenly thought of a very important question. Tongzi, does he follow me to the toilet? Within 1 meter, there was no distance at all. When she squatted on the toilet, did this ghost have to stay close to protect her? The system said, "It's okay, you won't be able to see him when you close your eyes." Wei Wei Bai. After a long silence, Wei Wei Bai asked again, "What about bathing?" The system said, just bear with it for a while. After all, he's your male lead." "Where's your male lead?" Wei Wei Bai was speechless for a while, then said, "That's good, he can't run away when I'm bathing." The system, ? Wei Wei Bai put down her luggage and saw Yu Maqin sitting on the bed, but he couldn't touch the bed. The sheets were not wrinkled at all. He thought for a while, then suddenly reached out to hold Wei Wei Bai's hand. Her warm fingertips were pressed into the sheets by him. The bed warmed up immediately and he sat on the bed. He couldn't help but touch the soft bed and the clean sheets. He let go of Wei Wei Bai's hand and couldn't help but roll around on the bed. His navy blue robe was full of marks from the sheets. Then he couldn't help but hug the round white pillow and bury his head in it, sighing at how comfortable it was. Wei Wei Bai took off her coat and stood by the bed, deep in thought. Finally, she hesitated and reached out to hold his wrist. "All right, I haven't introduced myself. I'm Wei Wei Bai." Yu Maqin looked at her from the side, his dark eyes looking adorably adorable. He smiled. "I'm Yu Maqin." He had a good impression of this little celestial master who had brought him out. Therefore, his attitude was unusually easygoing. He could actually be considered a gentle person or a ghost. Wei Wei Bai seemed to have opened up a chatterbox with him and began to nag him about her situation. For example, he had come to this city to work for his dream of buying a house. To be more familiar with her, Wei Wei Bai tried her best to make up stories about how hard it was for her to earn money and how she was chased away by her landlord many times. However, Yu Maqin simply concluded, "Your ability isn't good enough. It's only right that you starve to death." Wei Wei Bai, although his words were crude, his reasoning was not crude, but this was too straightforward. Yu Maqin also seemed to feel that he had gone too far, so he tried to salvage the situation. "It's fine. If you don't understand, I can teach you a few moves so that you can earn a living." Little Celestial Master's ability was simply terrible. Fortunately, she was from the Imperial Path faction. If she was from the Natural Path faction, he would probably be angered to death and directly beat this incompetent disciple to death. People from the Imperial Path faction were never reliable. There were many people who ate and drank for free and swindled others. They were more proficient in deception than exorcism. They were the faction that the Natural Path faction looked down on the most. However, Yu Maqin did not feel any repulsion. She was not his disciple, so why should he worry? It was rare to see such a good seedling like Wei Wei Bai in the Imperial Path faction. If she was in the Natural Path faction, they would definitely nurture her with all their might. She would not be in such a miserable state. Since she had brought him out to play, he could also teach her a few ordinary moves. It would not be a problem for her to earn a living and a few houses. Chapter 1675. Wei Wei Bai scratched her head in distress. "A ghost is teaching me the art of catching ghosts? Don't regret it if I catch you after I learn it." Yu Maqin stared at her blankly for a while before he couldn't help but laugh. "Sure, I'll wait for you to catch me." Wei Wei Bai looked at his mocking face and turned around. "Don't look down on me. It's just a ghost. Why would I be afraid of it?" After that, she walked to the bathroom angrily. 1 meter away from the male lead. Electric shock. She stopped in her tracks, and a wave of pain came from her body as if she had been struck by an electric current. It was so painful that she wanted to die. Wei Wei Bai held the door open with difficulty. She wanted to enter the narrow bathroom. This ghost was following her to the toilet. Taking a bath was fine, but going to the toilet was too much. She would try to solve it quickly. The electric shock wouldn't kill him. Bai Weiwei struggled to move her feet into the bathroom. Before the door was closed, she had already turned her head with a pale face. "Brother Yu, can I sit in front of the bathroom door?" She was going to be electrocuted to death. Her limbs were all over, and every blood vessel smelled of burning. She would die if she held on for another second. Yu Maqian's ears itched. Her voice seemed to be trembling, and the unique gentleness of a girl's voice was trembling. Brother, what a new name. He was the youngest in the Heavenly Tao school and never had a sister. But with his current age, he couldn't be her brother. He was old enough to be her grandfather. Seeing that she was going to die on the spot, Wei Wei Bai held the door and trembled. Her eyes were red from the pain and tears were about to burst out. Her voice was weak. I'm a little scared. Stay closer to me. Yu Mochin didn't know why, but he found it interesting to tease her. He turned his body and supported his face with his hand. What are you scared of? Wei Wei Bai said, I'm scared of ghosts. And even more scared of electric shocks. Yu Mochin smiled and said, I'm a ghost too. Wei Wei Bai was about to kneel on the spot. She held the door tightly and said through gritted teeth, You're different. Yu Mochin, what's the difference? Wei Wei Bai's mind was muddled by the electric current, and her voice became muffled. You won't hurt me. She analyzed Yu Mochin's past and found that he had a good personality. Compared to any of his previous targets, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to call him an angel. Suddenly, Wei Wei Bai felt her body become lighter, and the electric shock disappeared. Wei Wei Bai looked up and saw Yu Mochin floating in front of her. His dark eyes were bottomless and his pale face was devoid of any expression. His thin red lips curled up slightly as if he was mocking her. Then, he reached out his finger and tapped her forehead. Don't trust others so much. Don't trust ghosts either, you naive little fool. She had only seen him a few times, yet she had recklessly brought him out. What if he was an evil spirit? She died a long time ago. If you trust someone too much and get betrayed, it would be very painful. Wei Wei Bai rubbed her head and frowned as she muttered, You're different. Yu Mochin felt that she was completely unteachable. He shook his head. Alright, I'll stay here. No other ghosts will dare to come. Bai Wei Wei immediately nodded, then with a brush, she took off her clothes. Yu Mochin, under the clothes was the body of a young girl wearing a tight-fitting shirt. Her skin was as white as snow, her arms were slender, and her waist was soft and delicate. When she bent over, a short white waist was exposed under the clothes. That was all there was to it. He waited until she took off her pants. Yu Mochin suddenly turned around, his back facing her. Chapter 1676. He asked anxiously, What are you doing? Wei Wei Bai was confused for a moment. Taking a shower. Yu Mochin said, I'm here. How can you be so frivolous? Wei Wei Bai frowned in confusion. You're not human. What's there to be frivolous about? After that, Wei Wei Bai turned on the shower head. Yu Mochin heard the sound of running water and turned around curiously. However, he saw Wei Wei Bai taking a shower naked. Amidst the steam, that body that was as white and warm as a magnolia flower made his eyes burn. He immediately turned his head and his body stiffened. Didn't she know that showing her body to a man required a husband-wife relationship? Yu Mochin wanted to walk away, but when he remembered that she was afraid of ghosts, he could only stand there and not move. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Wei Wei Bai did not hear it and continued to take a shower. He raised his gloomy eyes and stared coldly at the door. 12 o'clock had passed. Something that should not have come out had come out. The knocking on the door became urgent. Then, it was a woman's voice. Open the door. Yu Mochin coldly curled his lips. How rude. Knocking on the door like this. Aren't you afraid that your soul will disappear? He stretched out his fingertips and gently snapped his fingers. The knocking on the door stopped. Yu Mochin's fingers were very graceful. He pulled out a yellow talisman from the air and said softly, Go. The yellow talisman went through the door and a muffled sound came from outside. The ghost who knocked on the door ran away. Yu Mochin was too lazy to chase, but he looked back warily. However, he saw that Wei Wei Bai's back was facing him. Under the steam, her beautiful back was so beautiful that his dark eyes were stunned. Then, he stiffened his neck and turned his face back. The sound of running water covered up his actions. The ghost in this hotel was a real malicious ghost. If the little celestial master ran into them, she might be taken away. Yu Mochin didn't know why he would one day worry so much about another person's matters. Perhaps it was a protective nature. After all, they belonged to the same path, and she was just a young seedling. It was reasonable for him to protect her. After rationalizing his actions, Yumochien finally breathed a sigh of relief. Suddenly, a hand patted his shoulder lightly. Yumochien's body stiffened again, as stiff as a zombie. He didn't dare to turn around, and his voice trembled slightly. "What is it?" Wei Weibai hesitated for a moment before saying, "I forgot to bring my clothes." "Yumochien, Wei Weibai, can you help me get my underwear and jacket?" Yumochien couldn't help but touch his face. He didn't know why, but he felt that his face was burning. His face was obviously pale and cold, so why did she feel like it was burning? He pursed his lips and floated to her luggage. With a light tap, the luggage opened. The clothes were scattered all over the place. The things in this luggage were really messy. Yumochien, who had obsessive-compulsive disorder, couldn't help but help her tidy up. Suddenly, the little celestial master's cry of pain came from behind. She seemed to be in pain. She staggered a few steps and was about to run toward him. Yumochien thought that there was some danger. He immediately turned around with a serious expression. A soft body fell into his arms. The cold embrace welcomed the impact of the scorching sun, and he was completely stunned. He floated upright, and his hands didn't dare to move. His eyes were fixed on the ceiling. The ghost that had escaped had a scary head popped out from the ceiling, wanting to launch a sneak attack. In the end, she saw Yumochien's dark eyes looking at her with murderous intent. The female ghost, then, she slowly retracted her head and pretended that she had never been here. Wei Weibai, who was numb from the electric shock, finally came back to her senses in Yumochien's arms. She stood up straight and heaved a sigh of relief. "I'm sorry for bumping into you. I couldn't stand properly." Yumochien felt that the warmth in his arms was gone. He immediately turned his back to her. He didn't make a sound and remained silent. Wei Weibai immediately put on her clothes. Hearing the sound of her putting on her clothes, Yumochien couldn't help but frown. He looked at her body. It seemed like he was really going to propose. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 1677. However, Yumochien saw that his fingers were almost transparent white. This color was as fragile as the fog at the end of spring that could disappear at any time. He sighed softly. In this state, it was not suitable for him to propose marriage. After all, it would delay her. A ghost should not be moved by humans. The two worlds were so distinct that it was almost impossible to cross over. Yumochien lowered his head. His dark eyes were a little depressed. Suddenly, he heard the sound of the bed sheets being lifted and the sound of Wei Weibai getting on the bed. "Brother Yu, it's very late. I'll sleep first." It was already past midnight. Wei Weibai felt that she would not feel safe if she did not hide in bed. She did not know if it was an illusion, but she felt that there was something wrong with this hotel. It was gloomy everywhere. However, she did not dare to ask. She was afraid that if she did, he would tell her that there were ghosts everywhere. If she did not know that there were ghosts, she would not be afraid. Once she knew that there were ghosts, she would be so scared that she would not dare to sleep at night. That little bit of money could be exchanged for a good night's sleep. She might really have to sleep on the streets tomorrow. She could not waste this last night of enjoyment with a blanket, a bed, and a roof because of ghosts. Therefore, Wei Weibai convinced herself again that there were no ghosts with a blanket. Yes, that was why the blanket was the safest place in the world. Yumochien did not dare to look back. He crossed his arms and pretended that he did not see her body. After all, if he admitted it, he would have to propose marriage. However, he did not have good conditions. If he proposed marriage, he could not give her happiness. This was an irresponsible thing to do. Therefore, Yumochien fell into a strange dilemma. He just came out to have fun. If there was a chance, he would seek justice. He did not expect that he would really get into a romantic debt. Yumochien helplessly put his hands together, supported his chin, and sighed helplessly in his heart. Wei Weibai's breathing gradually calmed down. Yumochien dared to secretly look back. However, he saw that she was wearing thin, short-sleeved underwear. Her limbs were spread out, and the blanket was kicked away. This sleeping posture was really bold. Yu Moqian stretched out 2 fingers and gently pinched the corner of the blanket. He lifted the blanket and covered her body with it. It also covered her fair arms and beautiful and adorable ankles. After covering himself with the blanket with much difficulty, Yu Moqian crossed his arms and said softly, "Now that you're with me, you've seen too many ghosts and will be haunted." When the pure yang body was suppressed, the disadvantage of the yin-yang eye appeared. He reached out his finger and gently placed it over her eyes. Her thick eyelashes swept across his palm. It was warm, and he was stunned for a moment. He had originally wanted to seal her yin-yang eyes. But after placing his finger on her eyelids and not moving for a long time, he calmly withdrew his hand. Forget it. What if I seal her yin-yang eyes? She wouldn't be able to see him. Let's talk about it later. Yu Moqian rested his chin on his hand and thought calmly. Suddenly, he heard the sound of the female ghost next door scratching the wall. Crick, crick, crick. It was indescribably irritating. A gust of cold air kept emerging from the ground. This hotel was in a place of great evil. Feng shui locations gathered yin energy. Once there was a murder, it was easy for malicious ghosts to appear. Therefore, it was easy for a group of ghosts to gather in such a place. But Yu Moqian was very sure that there was only one malicious ghost in this hotel. It was the female ghost just now who wanted to come in and attack them. She was scared away by him. There was only one, an abnormal number of words. Chapter 1678. It was strange that there was only one malicious spirit in such a dangerous place. Yu Moqian didn't want to meddle in other people's business. Whether he saved people or not, it was just a matter of convenience. The female ghost's voice became louder and louder. Strands of long hair began to appear from the ground. Yu Moqian looked down indifferently. Killing intent appeared in his dark eyes. He didn't listen to the warning. Don't blame him. Yu Moqian raised his hand. A fountain pen appeared and a peachwood sword was drawn. The red tassels on the peachwood sword floated in the air. They were as red as blood. He fixed the peachwood sword on the ground. The long hair disappeared in a flash. Yu Moqian floated in the air and raised his hand to draw in the air. Dozens of yellow talismans appeared and formed a circular array. They were pasted on the wall. Golden light appeared on the wall, emitting an unpleasant burning smell. The female ghost screamed. Yu Moqian sneered. Golden light flowed in his dark eyes. A golden mark appeared on his forehead. The heavenly Dao Sex Dao technique was to connect the heavens and control the ghosts. Yin and Yang opened the Dao and reversed the universe. When he was still alive, he was still young and unfamiliar with all kinds of spells. However, after so many years of suppression and experience in fighting ghosts, he was barely qualified to touch the bowl of rice of the founder. The yellow talismans emitted golden lines that climbed on the wall. The lines of each yellow talisman were connected. Finally, the room became a cage of golden lines. No power of the netherworld could penetrate. The female ghost's voice was also completely isolated. Yu Moqian turned around and saw that the little celestial master's frown slowly eased because of the noise. He looked at her quietly for a while, then floated out of the room with the peachwood sword. This hotel gave him a familiar and strange feeling. A ghost hotel, a taboo to not go out at midnight. There was also a huge feng shui terrain that looked like a yin gathering formation. What a strange place. Yu Moqian landed on the ground. His long robe fluttered. There was a murderous coldness in his handsome face. The ground was abnormally cold. After he went out, he saw that in the dark corridor, the door of the next room was open. A female ghost's shrill voice sounded. "Why did you abandon me? I loved you so much. I became a murderer for you. If your wife hadn't died, how could you have gotten her company?" A woman's voice came from the next room. A man's voice sounded in annoyance. "Enough, are you done yet? I don't know who the murderer is. My wife jumped off a building because of depression. Don't talk nonsense." The woman roared, "You don't want to admit it after making me a murderer? I love you." The man finally held back his anger and comforted her. "Well, the limelight is very tight recently. Don't make trouble. I love you too. We'll get married in a while." The woman hesitated. "Really? The man was silent for a moment, then said, "Really, come here, I bought you a necklace." Yumochin walked step by step to the next room and found that it was very bright. The table, bed, and chairs were all very cozy. There was fruit on the table. The TV was on. A man's back was facing the door. He reached out and put his hand on the woman's neck. A slender but unusually hard necklace strangled the woman's neck. The woman struggled desperately. Blood flowed from her neck and more blood flowed out. Finally, the room was covered with blood. The bright room dimmed and became blood red. / you're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.